Hello guys, welcome to Malevolent Shrine Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was summoned by the world government to marry a secret celestial dragon princess? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unwilling Groom. The air over Konohagakure tasted of peace, a flavor so long sought after that Naruto Uzumaki still found himself savoring it on his tongue, lest it vanish like a fleeting dream. He sat perched atop the stone head of his father, the fourth Hokage, his legs dangling over the precipice. Below, the village sprawled out, a tapestry of life woven in hues of aura. NGE sunset and the deep green of the will of fire. Laughter from the streets below drifted up on the evening breeze, a sound more precious than any treasure. The Great War was a scar, but a scar that was healing. Fading into the story of a world that had chosen unity over annihilation. Kurama, a silent, titanic presence within him, rumbled with a contentment that mirrored his own. It was a quiet, perfect moment. And then the world tore open. There was no sound, no warning, only a violent, wrenching sensation as if a colossal, invisible hand had seized him. The air solidified, compressing around him with impossible force. The familiar scent of ramen and rich earth was replaced by the sterile smell of ozone and something ancient, like dust from a tomb. Colors bled into one another, the vibra NT sunset of his home smearing into streaks of sickening purple and void black. It was not a teleportation jutsu, he knew the distinct, controlled feeling of the Hiraishin. This was chaos. This was a violation of physics. A brute force dragging of his very existence from one point in reality to another. He braced himself, flooding his coils with sage chakra, the raw energy of the world his only anchor in the storm. His senses, expanded and hyper-aware, screamed at him. He felt the fabric of space-time groan and stretch to its breaking point. For a heart-stopping second, he feared utter disintegration. His atoms scattered across an infinity of nothing. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Silence. A profound, unnerving silence that soaked up all noise. He was on his feet, his body instinctively crouched in a defensive stance, every muscle taut and ready. The kaleidoscope of chaos was gone, replaced by a vast, cavernous hall of polished, white and gold marble. The light was soft, sourceless, illuminating intricate carvings on towering pillars that depicted strange, unfamiliar histories of kings and conquests. The air was cool, sterile, and still. There were no windows, no doors save for a single, impossibly large set of golden gates behind him, now sealed shut. It felt less like a room and more like the inside of a grand sarcophagus. He stood in the center of an ornate sigil carved into the floor. A complex pattern of interlocking circles and sharp, geometric lines that pulsed with a faint, residual energy. The summoning circle, old, powerful, and utterly foreign. Remarkable, a voice said, echoing slightly in the immense chamber. It was dry, like rustling parchment. It actually worked. Naruto's eyes snapped forward. Seated before him on elegantly crafted, high-backed chairs were 5 men. They were old, ancient even, their faces landscapes of wrinkles and tired wisdom. One was bald with a formidable mustache and a long scar over his eye, holding a sword across his lap. Another wore a dark suit and a flat cap, his face obscured in shadow. A third had long, flowing white hair and a beard, wearing immaculate white robes. The fourth was tall and lean with a prominent birthmark on his forehead. And the last was a stoic, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, his hands clasped before him. They were the Gorosei, the 5 elders, the highest authority of the world government. Though Naruto did not know their names or titles, he knew power when he saw it. Theirs was not the vibrant, crackling energy of a shinobi. It was a different kind of strength, old, deep, and heavy. Like the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench. It was the power of absolute, unquestioned authority, honed over centuries. And yet, beneath that authority, he sensed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of apprehension. They were looking at him not as a guest, but as one might observe a newly uncaged tiger. Naruto straightened up, letting the tension bleed from his shoulders. He brushed a non-existent speck of dust from his simple black and orange jacket. The oppressive silence stretched, a palpable thing in the air between them. It was a test, a waiting game to see who would speak first. Who would cede the first inch of ground? Naruto had played this game with Raikage and Tsuchikage. He was not impressed. He broke the silence, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the hall's heavy stillness. "You've got a lot of nerve," he began, a casual, almost conversational tone that seemed to throw them off balance. "Ripping someone out of their home is a good way to get it burned to the ground. You have about 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't start here." The air grew thick with unspoken menace. A dozen figures in pristine white suits and black ties materialized from the shadows along the walls. They wore strange, emotionless masks and stood in perfectly still, disciplined ranks. Cypher Pole Aegis Zero, the personal guard of the Celestial Dragons. Their presence was meant to be intimidating. Naruto didn't even glance at them. His gaze remained locked on the 5 men. He could feel their life forces, their intent. They were strong, but they were just men. He had fought gods and won. The bald elder with the sword, the one who seemed to be their martial anchor, spoke. His voice was a low growl. "You are in the presence of the highest authority in this world. You would do well to show respect." Naruto offered a lazy, one-sided smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Respect is earned, not given. I'm still waiting on that explanation." He took a single, deliberate step forward. Off the summoning sigil, the guards tensed. The 5 elders remained motionless, but he could feel the shift in their energy, a tightening of their focus. The elder with the long white hair, who seemed to be the primary speaker, raised a placating hand. "Patience. We understand your disorientation. We did not take this action lightly. A debt has been called in, Naruto Uzumaki." The use of his name was a calculated move, meant to establish their knowledge, their power. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't owe anyone anything. Not you, perhaps," the elder continued, his voice smooth and persuasive. "But your world does. Ages ago, your reality faced an extinction-level threat, a creature that consumed stars. It was an ancestor of our own, one of the founders of this world, who traversed the void and aided your people in sealing it away. In return, a pact was made. A promise that should our world ever face a threat of similar magnitude, your world would provide its champion in aid." Naruto stood silent, processing. The story was fantastical, unbelievable, yet the sheer power it must have taken to summon him lent it a sliver of credibility. He thought of Kagaya, of the god-like beings he had faced. A Star Eater. It wasn't outside the realm of possibility. "A threat?" Naruto asked, his voice losing its earlier nonchalance. "What kind of threat?" The 5 men exchanged a glance. A silent conversation passing between them in an instant. It was the elder with the birthmark who answered. "The balance of the world is fracturing. Ancient powers stir. We require a force that can unify and pacify, an absolute power that can remind the world of its proper order." "You want a weapon," Naruto stated flatly. "It wasn't a question. We want an ally," the elder in the flat cap corrected, his voice a sibilant whisper. "One bound to our cause, to our blood. An unbreakable alliance." The pieces clicked into place in Naruto's mind. This wasn't just about a threat, it was about control. They were afraid, and they wanted a tool to maintain their power. He was about to tell them exactly where they could shove their pact when the Grand Golden Dew RS at the far end of the hall swung open with a silent, ponderous grace. 2 massive guards in gleaming, horned armor flanked the entrance. Between them walked a young woman. She was dressed in a breya, taking ly ornate gown of white and silver that seemed to float around her, shimmering in the ethereal light. Her hair was a pale, silvery blonde, styled in an intricate arrangement that spoke of hours of preparation. She moved with a practiced, gliding poise, her expression carefully neutral, her eyes downcast. She was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a flawless statue, cold and distant. Naruto felt the oppressive atmosphere in the room change. The Gorosei's stern mien softened almost imperceptibly. The CP0 agents bowed their heads in absolute deference. This was royalty. "To seal this pact," the lead elder announced, his voice taking on a ceremonial tone, "and to bind you to our world in flesh and spirit, you will marry into the most noble of lineages. You will wed a celestial dragon." He gestured to the approaching woman. "May I present Princess Kalia?" Naruto stared. A political marriage. A cage. They weren't just asking for his help. They were trying to put a collar on him, to bind him with titles and obligations. To bury him in their world of suffocating tradition. His first instinct was to laugh. His second was to refuse so forcefully it would crack the marble walls. He had fought for his freedom. For the freedom of his entire world. He would never, ever be anyone's property. He opened his mouth to say just that, but then the princess, Kalia, lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and Naruto's world tilted on its axis for the second time that day. Her eyes were a startling shade of amethyst, deep and intelligent. But it wasn't their color that struck him. It was what he saw within them. He had the sage's ability to perceive the nature of things, to feel the emotions of others not as a guess but as a tangible force. The Gorosei radiated arrogance and pragmatism. The guards were blank slates of duty. But the princess, within her, he saw a raging, silent storm. There was a profound, soul-deep loneliness, a crushing weight of expectation, and a desperate, desperate yearning for something more. But beneath it all, burning like a hidden ember, was a core of pure, unyielding defiance. She was not a willing participant. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, and her eyes were a silent scream for escape. In that one look, he saw a spirit so akin to his own, trapped, fighting, refusing to be broken. The refusal died on his lips. This changed everything. This was no longer about a group of arrogant old men trying to use him. This was about her. The princess stopped a respectful distance away, performing a flawless, shallow curtsy. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her eyes said everything. Help me. Naruto turned his gaze back to the Gorosei, who watched him with shrewd, expectant eyes. They thought they had him cornered, that the honor of marrying a god of their world would sway him. They had miscalculated, but not in the way they thought. They had inadvertently given him a reason to stay. A reason to play their game. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. This one reaching his electric blue eyes. It was a predator's smile, full of confidence and hidden intent. The Gorosei, for all their ancient wisdom, seemed momentarily confused by it. It was not the reaction of a man accepting a great honor. It was the reaction of a man who had just been handed the keys to the entire castle. All right, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a newfound energy. The CP0 guards subtly shifted their weight, unease creeping into their perfect stances. I accept. The elders relaxed, a collective, inaudible sigh of relief passing through them. The lead elder nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. A wise decision. But Naruto cut him off, his voice hardening, taking on the commanding tone of a cage addressing his troops. He held up a single finger. We do this on my terms. All of them. He let that hang in the air, a direct challenge to their absolute authority. First, he said, his eyes flicking to the princess, then back to the elders. She is to be treated with respect. My respect. That means none of you, his gaze swept over the 5 of them, will treat her as a political tool in my presence. She is my partner in this, not my price. He held up a second finger. Second, I am an ally, not a servant. You don't give me orders. You ask for my assistance. If I deem the cause just, I'll help. If I don't, I won't. You want a weapon, fine, but I choose my own targets. Quote, a third finger joined the others. Third, I am free to go where I please, when I please. These guards of yours, he flicked his eyes towards the masked agents, they don't follow me. They don't watch me. If I want privacy, I get it. Trying to tail me will just be embarrassing for you. The Gorosei's expressions had hardened back into stone. The bald elder's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. This was not the docile acceptance they had expected. This was a list of demands. Your terms are bold, the elder with the birthmark said, his voice dangerously low. They're non-negotiable, Naruto replied, his smile gone, replaced by a look of utter resolve. You brought me here because you're scared of something you can't handle. That means I have something you need. It's called leverage. Take the deal, or send me back. And if you can't send me back, his voice dropped, and a flicker of immense, golden power flared in his eyes, making the very air thrum, then you'll have a much bigger problem than whatever it is you're afraid of. For a long, tense moment, the hall was silent again. The 5 most powerful men in the world were in a standoff with a single orange-clad stranger. Naruto didn't waver. He had faced down Kagaya Otsutsuki. These 5 were just a committee. He saw Kaleya take a tiny, almost imperceptible breath. A flicker of hope, bright and fierce, had ignited in her amethyst eyes. That was all the confirmation he needed. Finally, the lead elder gave a slow, deliberate nod. Your terms are acceptable. For now, the alliance is what matters most. The unspoken addendum hung in the air. We will see who truly holds the power here in the end. Good, Naruto said, his easygoing demeanor returning in an instant. So, when's the wedding? The ceremony was as cold and lifeless as the hall in which it was held. There was no music, no guests, only Naruto, Kaleya, the 5 elders, and their silent, masked guards. Kaleya had been fitted into another, even more elaborate gown, a construct of silk and jewels so heavy it seemed to weigh down her very soul. Naruto stood beside her in his own clothes, having flatly refused the stiff, formal attire they had offered him. He was a splash of vibrant orange and black in a world of sterile white and gold. An elder recited vows from an ancient text, his voice droning on about lineage, duty, and the sacred union of the celestial and the terrestrial. The words were meaningless, a hollow formality to legitimize a political transaction. Naruto paid them no mind. Instead, he focused on the woman standing beside him. He could feel the fine tremor in her hands, the tightly controlled cadence of her breathing. She was terrified, but resolute. When the time came, he took her hand. Her skin was cool, her fingers delicate, but her grip, surprisingly, was firm. As their hands touched, he sent a minuscule, controlled pulse of his own chakra into her, not to probe or invade, but to offer a silent message of reassurance. You're not alone in this. He felt her start, a barely noticeable hitch in her breath. Her amethyst eyes flicked up to his, wide with surprise. He gave her a small, conspiratorial wink. For the first time, a genuine, unscripted emotion crossed her face, a flicker of stunned disbelief, followed by a tiny, almost invisible upward quirk of her lips. A seed of an alliance, a real one, had just been planted. By the authority vested in us by the founding of this world, we declare this pact sealed. You are now one, the elder intoned, closing the ancient book with a soft thud. The words echoed in the silence. No one clapped, no one cheered. A contract had been signed. A deal had been struck. Naruto Uzumaki, the sage of 6 paths, was now the husband of a celestial dragon princess. As he looked at his new bride, and she looked back at him, they both understood the truth of their situation. The wedding was over. The war had just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Gilded Cage. Their new home was a masterpiece of opulence and a monument to imprisonment. It was called the Pavilion of Tranquil Skies, a sprawling palace of pearlescent marble and lustrous gold set apart from the other more ostentatious manors of Mary Geoise. Every column was a work of art, every tapestry told a story of the world government's divine victory, and every window was made of glass so clear it felt as if nothing stood between them and the endless blue above. Yet, the air within was heavy, recycled, tasting of gilded polish and the faint, cloying scent of exotic flowers that bloomed without soul in perfectly manicured gardens. It was a beautiful, breathtaking cage. And it was watched. Naruto felt the eyes constantly. They were shadows in the corners of the vast, empty halls. Flickers of movement on distant rooftops, and the unnerving stillness of servants who were more than they appeared. CP0 agents, the elite of the elite, were his silent, ever-present jailers. They didn't intrude or interact. They simply were, a constant, oppressive reminder of his location. They thought him contained. The first few days were a quiet, awkward dance. Naruto and Kaleya circle each other with the cautious curiosity of 2 predators forced to share a territory. They ate their meals in a dining hall that could have seated 100, the clinking of their silverware echoing in the cavernous space. Kaleya was perfectly composed, her etiquette flawless, her conversation sparse and polite. She spoke of the weather, of the history of the art on the walls, of anything and everything that meant nothing. Naruto would answer with a simple grunt or a short phrase, his attention seemingly elsewhere. He was mapping the palace in his mind, feeling the flow of energy, noting the positions of the guards, tasting the very air for threats. He saw her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. He didn't fit. In this world of pristine white and rigid formality, he was a bonfire of orange and black. He moved with a liquid grace that was entirely at odds with the stiff postures of the nobles. He ate with a hearty appetite that bordered on barbaric by their standards. He was an anomaly, a wild thing set loose in a sterile laboratory, and Kalia seemed utterly fascinated by what he would do. On the third day, he decided to show her. He was in the palace's grand library, a room filled with thousands of leather-bound, identical-looking volumes. Kalia was at a large oak table, diligently reading. Naruto stood, stretched with a loud groan that made her flinch, and announced, "Getting stuffy in here. Think I'll get some fresh air." He walked towards the towering, arched windows. Kalia looked up, a flicker of alarm in her amethyst eyes. "The gardens are that way," she said softly, pointing toward the main doors. "Nah," Naruto said with a grin. "Too boring." Before she could process his words, he unlatched the window and, with a casual hop, stepped out onto the row ledge several hundred feet above the ground. Kalia shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking as she rushed to the window. She saw him for a split second, a silhouette against the sky, before he simply vanished. Panic, sharp and cold, seized her. Had he fallen? Had he tried to escape? A dozen CP0 agents materialized on the balcony below and the rooftop above, their masked faces scanning the area with frantic, disciplined movements. They saw nothing. He was gone. The commander, a tall man whose mask couldn't hide the furious tension in his body, barked orders into a tiny den mushi. The cage had been breached. Kalia's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the windowsill, her knuckles white. Was this it? Was their desperate plan over before it had even begun? The view's much better from up here. The voice came from directly above her. She snapped her head up. Naruto was sitting on the steep, tiled roof as casually as if he were on a park bench, his legs crossed, leaning back on his hands. He wasn't even winded. He gave her a lazy wave. The CP0 agents on the roof froze, their heads whipping around in disbelief. They hadn't heard him, hadn't sensed him. He had appeared from nowhere, a ghost of orange and black against the setting sun. He had bypassed the most elite surveillance unit in the world without them even realizing he was gone. He wasn't just powerful in a fight, he was untouchable. It wasn't a threat, it was a simple statement of fact. Your cage cannot hold me. A slow smile spread across Kalia's face. It was the first genuine, unrestrained smile Naruto had seen from her. It transformed her face, melting the icy statue and revealing the fiery woman beneath. The Gorosei had not summoned a weapon. Her father had not summoned an ally. They had summoned a force of nature. Later that night, she came to him. He was in the central courtyard, lying on his back in the grass and staring up at the artificial stars of Mary Gioise's sky dome. He heard her approach, the soft rustle of her silk dress a whisper against the stone path. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice stripped of its earlier formality. "Do what?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the fake constellations. "Get past them. No one gets past them." He finally turned his head, propping himself up on an elbow. They were looking for a man. They weren't looking for a shadow, or the wind, or a memory. He sat up fully. They think in straight lines. I don't. She stood before him, a silhouette in the pale moonlight. They are furious. The Gorosei have been displeased. Let them be, Naruto said with a shrug. They needed to know the rules. I'm here because I choose to be. The moment I don't, I'm gone. They don't own me, and they don't own you, either. That last sentence hung in the air between them. Kalia took a deep breath, a decision solidifying in her eyes. There is something I must show you, she said. Something my father showed me. The real reason this world is broken. She led him not to the grand library, but deep into the palace's foundations, to a section that was old, dark, and forgotten. Dust motes danced in the single globe of light she held, a strange, glowing pearl that illuminated ancient stone. She pressed a series of seemingly random bricks in the wall, and a section ground open, revealing a hidden, descending staircase. My ancestors were scholars, not warriors, she explained as they walked, her voice a hushed echo in the narrow passage. They collected what the others sought to burn. The truth. The room she led him to was a stark contrast to the opulence above. It was a simple, circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves groaning under the weight of mismatched books and worn scrolls. This was no pristine collection. T.S. was a hidden archive of forbidden knowledge. The air smelled of old paper and rebellion. The world government tells a story of a great victory, Kalia said, her hand sweeping across the room. 100 kings uniting to defeat a great evil and bring peace to the world. That is a lie. She pulled a heavy, leather-bound tome from a shelf. The cover was blank. She opened it to a page filled with dense, archaic text and illustrations that made Naruto's blood run cold. They depicted a vibrant, technologically advanced civilization, a kingdom of joyous, prosperous people. And then, they depicted its annihilation. 20 kings, not 100, standing over the ruins, their shadows long and twisted. At their center was a figure cloaked in darkness, a crown of thorns upon his head. The great kingdom, Kalia whispered, her finger tracing the faded ink. They weren't evil. They were different. They believed true freedom was the right of all people, not just kings. The 20 kings who founded the world government feared that idea. So they destroyed them, erased them from history. The Void Century wasn't a time of darkness, it was the time they spent burning the history books. Naruto stared at the images, a grim understanding dawning on him. He had seen this before. The lust for power, the rewriting of history to suit the victors. It was the story of shinobi, magnified on a global scale. And my ancestors, Kalia continued, her voice laced with a bitter self-loathing, the celestial dragons, they were the 20 kings who placed themselves above the world, calling themselves gods to justify the greatest genocide in history. She then pulled out a thin, fragile scroll. The text was even older, almost illegible. This one is different. It speaks of the time before the Great Kingdom. It speaks of a pact made not with men, but with something else. A power from the void. A hollow king, who granted the 20 kings their victory in exchange for a promise that he would one day return to claim the world they had built for him. Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air of the archive. A hollow king, a creature that consumed stars. The stories were beginning to connect, forming a terrifying tapestry. The threat the Gorosei feared wasn't just revolution. It was something far older, far more powerful. They weren't just tyrants, they were terrified gatekeepers, sitting on a throne that rested atop a slumbering god's tomb. My father, Kalia said, her voice barely a whisper, believes the throne is cracking. That the whispers of the low king are seeping back into the world, fueling the hatred and madness. He thinks the only way to save the world is to dismantle the throne itself, to create a world that doesn't need gods or kings. That's why he arranged this. He didn't want a weapon for the government. He wanted a storm that could tear it all down. In the silence of the Forgotten Room, their alliance was truly forged. Not with vows and ceremonies, but with shared truth and a common enemy. Naruto finally understood. Kalia wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was a scholar, a revolutionary, armed with the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth. And he was her sword. Their newfound partnership was put to the test 2 nights later. They were summoned to a formal dinner at the manor of St. Charlos, a name Kalia had uttered with a unique mixture of disgust and dread. The experience was everything Naruto had expected and worse. The celestial dragons were not merely arrogant, they were a different species of being. So insulated by privilege that they barely recognized others as sentient. They spoke of their slaves as if they were furniture, complained about the quality of the air outside their filtered domes. ND treated the servants with a casual cruelty that made Naruto's fists clench under the table. Charlos himself was a grotesque caricature of a man, with a perpetually runny nose and a vacant, cruel stare. He spent most of the dinner whining about a mermaid princess he wanted for his collection. Naruto remained silent, a thundercloud of barely restrained power at Kalia's side. His presence alone was a deterrent. The other nobles gave him a wide berth, sensing the predator in their midst. The breaking point came when a young servant, her hands trembling, accidentally spilled a drop of wine on the sleeve of another celestial dragon. Saint Rosward, a portly man with a cruel sneer, backhanded the girl across the face, sending her sprawling to the floor. Insolent filth, he hissed. You have stained me. I should have you executed for this. The girl sobbed, scrambling backward on the floor, her eyes wide with terror. The other celestial dragons either laughed or looked on with bored indifference. This was normal. This was their world. Before anyone could move, before Kalia could even gasp, Naruto was on his feet. He didn't shout. He didn't move towards Rosward. He simply looked at him. And for the first time in his pampered, pathetic life, Saint Rosward knew fear. It wasn't a physical threat. It was something deeper. Naruto released a sliver of his killing intent, a focused, needle point of pure, unadulterated menace aimed directly at the fat noble. The air around Rosward grew impossibly cold. The light in the room seemed to dim. The cheerful chatter of the dinner party faded into a distant, muffled roar. All he could see were Naruto's eyes, no longer bright blue, but cold and hard as glacial ice. He felt the weight of 1,000 battles, the gaze of a being who had looked gods in the eye and made them bleed. He felt, with absolute certainty, that if he moved, if he even breathed wrong, his existence would be snuffed out like a candle flame. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His sneer melted into a slack-jawed terror. He began to tremble, the wine in his glass sloshing over the rim. She is forgiven, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. Naruto's gaze did not soften. He held it for 3 more heartbeats, searing the memory of this terror into the man's soul. Then, he blinked, and it was over. The warmth and light rushed back into the room. The sounds of the party returned. Rosward was left panting, pale and shaking, staring at Naruto as if he'd just seen a ghost. Naruto calmly sat back down, picked up his chopsticks, and took a bite of fish. He turned to Kalia and said, in a perfectly normal voice, "This is pretty good. You should try some." The rest of the dinner passed in a tense, confused silence. They walked back to their own palace under the pale, artificial moonlight. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. They stopped on the grand balcony overlooking the world below. Beyond the protected bubble of Mary Geoise, the red line stretched out into the darkness, a stark, impassable wall bisecting the world. Far below, the lights of ships twinkled on the dark sea. It was a world in turmoil. A world they had to somehow save from its own self-proclaimed gods. "Thank you," Kalia said softly, her gaze on the distant horizon. "It was nothing," Naruto replied, leaning against the balustrade. "He was annoying me." She finally looked at him, a real, genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki?" He thought for a moment, thinking of his village, his friends, the long, hard road he had walked. He thought of the peace he had been ripped from, and the new, unexpected purpose he had found here, beside this strange, defiant princess. "I'm just a guy who doesn't like it when people treat their friends like dirt," he said with a small smile. He looked at her. "And whether you like it or not, princess, you and I are in this together. That makes us friends." Kalia looked taken aback. Then a soft, hesitant smile touched her lips. "Friends," she repeated, the word tasting foreign and precious. "I think I would like that." They stood there for a long time. 2 lone figures on a balcony in their gilded cage. But for the first time, it felt a little less like a prison, and a little more like a fortress. Their fortress, against the world. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The First Test. The summons came 3 days after the disastrous dinner party. It was delivered by a masked agent who appeared in the center of their grand hall with the silent finality of a drawn blade. Presented a sealed scroll, and vanished. The message was simple, devoid of pleasantries. Naruto Uzumaki was to present himself before the 5 elders. Kalia's face, which had slowly been gaining warmth and color in their days of shared discovery, paled back to the color of fine porcelain. "It's a test," she whispered, her fingers tracing the wax seal on the scroll, a symbol of the world's highest authority. "They were humiliated by what you did at the dinner. They cannot allow you to be perceived as uncontrollable. They will send you somewhere to prove you are their tool." Naruto took the scroll from her. His touch gentle. "Every mission is a test," he said, his voice calm. He broke the seal and read the elegant, flowing script. "An island. Navarone. They say it's a hotbed for pirates and revolutionaries. They want me to restore order." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "They're also sending me a babysitter." "Who?" Kalia asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. An admiral. A guy named Kizaru. Kalia's breath hitched. She immediately turned and strode towards the hidden passage to their secret library, her movements sharp with urgency. Come. There is no time to waste. Down in the dusty, truth-filled chamber, she worked with a frantic energy, pulling scrolls and ledgers from the shelves. Navarone is not a pirate haven, she explained, her voice low and rapid as she unrolled a series of old maps. It's a tragedy. It was an independent, prosperous island, famous for its unique geological formations, crystals that resonate with and amplify energy. Decades ago, the world government took an interest. They didn't conquer it with ships, they did it with economics and a puppet. She pointed to a line in a declassified financial report. Baron Vane, a distant, disgraced relative of a celestial dragon family. The government backed his claim to the island's throne. Within 5 years, he had declared the crystal mines the property of the throne and the people his personal workforce. They are not rebels, Naruto. They are slaves, fighting for the lives their parents once knew. She then pulled out a slim, black-bound dossier with a single, stylized image of a Marine admiral on the cover. It was a man in a pinstripe suit, his face fixed in a lazy, almost bored expression. Borsellino. Kizaru. He is not like the others, Kalia warned, her tone grim. Akainu is a zealot. Aokiji was a melancholic. Kizaru is empty. He possesses the Pika Pika no Mi, the glint glint fruit. He is a man made of light. He can move at the speed of light, fire lasers that can obliterate a town in seconds. But his greatest danger is not his power. It is his ambiguity. He follows orders with a detached sort of curiosity, destroying thousands with the same energy he might use to trim his fingernails. He is unpredictable because he seems to have no core, no conviction. He is a scalpel of unimaginable sharpness in the hands of the Gorosei. Do not underestimate him. Naruto absorbed the information, his blue eyes hard as diamonds. He wasn't being sent to keep the peace. He was being sent to crush an uprising of slaves, and the man beside him would be a living weapon, a perfect tool of the state. The test was clear. Would he be a tool as well? He placed a hand on Kalia's shoulder, stopping her frantic search for more information. I understand, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that calmed the air in the room. Thank you. This is what I needed. She looked up at him, her amethyst eyes filled with fear for him, for their plan. What will you do? What I always do, he said with a wolfish grin. I'll get it done, my way. The journey was a study in contrasts. The marine warship was a behemoth of gray steel, cutting through the ocean with ruthless efficiency. Naruto stood at the prow. The sea spray cool on his face, a vibrant splash of orange against the muted tones of the military vessel. Kizaru, true to Kalia's description, was a pillar of languid disinterest. He lounged in a deck chair, shaded by a parasol held by an anxious-looking subordinate, his signature yellow-striped suit immaculate. Ooh, Kizaru's voice drawled, slow as molasses, cutting through the rush of the wind. You're very quiet, Naruto-san. Are you nervous? Facing down a rebellion can be messy. Naruto didn't turn. Were you nervous the first time? Kizaru seemed to consider this, tapping a finger against his lips. I can't say that I was. It's all a matter of perspective, isn't it? To them, it's the end of their world. To me, it's a Tuesday. He appeared beside Naruto in a shimmer of yellow light, having crossed the length of the ship in less than a heartbeat. He leaned on the railing, his movements boneless and relaxed. They say you came from another world. Is it very different from this one? Quote, some things are the same everywhere, Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. People in power want to stay there. People who have nothing want a better life. How very profound. Kizaru hummed, though he sounded more amused than impressed. He tilted his head. Ooh, scary eyes you have, though. So intense. Ever fought a man who moves at the speed of light? It's a very dazzling experience. His smile was thin, a bloodless line on his face. For me, at least. Naruto finally turned to face him. He didn't release any killing intent, didn't posture. He just met the Admiral's gaze and gave him a simple, honest smile. I've fought a goddess who could teleport between dimensions. Speed isn't everything. Kizaru's lazy smile didn't falter, but Naruto, with his sage-honed senses, felt a flicker in the man's aura. It was a spark of genuine interest. This wasn't the usual bluster of a pirate or the desperate bravado of a revolutionary. It was a simple statement of fact. For the first time, Kizaru was intrigued. They arrived at Navarone under a sky choked with gray smoke. Kalia's words had been an understatement. The island was a wound. Great, festering scars of open-pit mines bled across lush green hills. The main town was a fortress of corrugated metal and desperation, huddled in the shadow of a dark, menacing castle that squat Ted on the highest peak like a carrion bird. The sounds of sporadic gunfire echoed across the water. From the deck of the warship, they could see the battle. A ragged line of men and women, armed with little more than mining tools and stolen rifles, were making a desperate push against a line of heavily armed soldiers in the livery of Baron Vane. The soldiers were methodical, cutting down the rebels with cold, professional efficiency. Kizaru stretched, a long, lazy motion like a cat waking from a nap. Well, he sighed, a single finger beginning to glow with a brilliant, terrifying yellow light. Shall we get this over with? A little Yasukani no Magatama should clean this all right up. He was preparing to unleash a storm of light energy projectiles, a rain of death that would obliterate the battlefield, rebel and soldier alike. No, the word was quiet, but it cut through the air with the force of a thunderclap. Kizaru paused, his glowing finger still raised, and turned his head slowly towards Naruto. His expression was one of mild surprise. This isn't a rebellion, Naruto said, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. It's an execution, and I'm not your executioner. He stepped between Kizaru and the island. I'll handle this. It was a direct challenge. A subordinate challenging a fleet admiral. A guest challenging his host. Kizaru's lazy demeanor finally fell away, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The air crackled with power. Ooh, Kizaru said, his voice dangerously soft. The Gorosei gave us a direct order, Naruto-san. Pacify the island. And I will, Naruto countered. Pacifying doesn't have to mean slaughtering. You can watch. Maybe you'll learn something. For a long moment, the two of them were locked in a silent battle of wills. Kizaru, the embodiment of the government's overwhelming, indifferent power, and Naruto, the embodiment of an entirely different kind of strength. Then, to the utter astonishment of every marine on deck, Kizaru's finger dimmed. A slow, wide smile spread across his face, this one filled with genuine, unsettling amusement. How very interesting, he drawled. Very well, you take the lead. Don't disappoint me. He dematerialized into a flash of light, reappearing in his deck chair as if nothing had happened. I'll just watch. Naruto turned back to the island. He didn't need the ship. He took a running start, and with a single, chakra-fueled leap, he soared across the half-mile of water, landing like a silent meteor in the middle of the chaotic battlefield. Everything stopped. Rebels and soldiers alike froze, staring at the impossible man who had just fallen from the sky. Naruto didn't waste a second. He slammed his palms together in a familiar seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The world exploded in puffs of white smoke. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of Naruto Uzumakis flooded the battlefield. It was a tidal wave of orange and black that swept over the contested ground. The clones moved with a single, unified purpose. They didn't strike to kill. Their movements were a blur of precision and control. One group surged into the soldiers' ranks, their hands a blur as they dismantled rifles, dislodged ammunition clips, and snapped swords with contemptuous ease. Another group used taijutsu, precise chops to the neck and joints that sent the soldiers down into unconsciousness without a single broken bone. A third group became a rescue corps, pulling injured rebels from the line of fire. It wasn't a battle, it was a disassembly. Within 5 minutes, Baron Vane's entire ground force was neutralized, disarmed, and neatly tied up, with not a single life lost on either side. The rebels stared, their makeshift weapons hanging slack in their hands, their faces a mixture of awe and utter confusion. From the deck of the warship, Kizaru watched through a pair of binoculars, a low whistle escaping his lips. Naruto, the original, didn't pause to savor the moment. He shot like a cannonball towards the looming castle. Baron Vane, a portly, sweating man in ridiculously opulent clothes, was screaming at his guards from a high balcony. "What are you doing? Shoot him! Kill him!" His last line of defense, a dozen hulking, 7-foot-tall automatons with glowing crystal cores stepped forward. They were crude, early-model pacifistas, powered by the island's unique resources. Their arms morphed into cannons, charging with a high-pitched whine. Naruto didn't even slow down. His right hand erupted with a storm of shrieking wind. Futon. Recentrican. He wasn't aiming for the Baron or his machines. He hurled the miniature hurricane of chakra blades at the castle's main tower, where a massive, captive crystal pulsed with raw energy, the central power source for the entire fortress. The Recentrican struck, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, with a sound like a screaming god, the crystal overloaded. The shuriken's microscopic wind blades severed the energy connections on a cellular level. The automatons' lights died. The castle's defensive turrets slumped. The fortress was neutered, its technological heart shredded from the inside out, all without disturbing a single stone of the outer walls. Naruto landed softly on the balcony before the terrified Baron. My. The air shimmered, and Kizaru coalesced from pure light, standing between Naruto and the sputtering noble. His lazy smile was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, clinical assessment. You've made quite a mess, Naruto-san. The world government wanted this island pacified, not liberated. I do have my orders. A single, brilliant beam of light shot from his finger, aimed not at Naruto, but at the rebel leader who was just now entering the castle courtyard below. Naruto moved without thinking. He appeared in front of the laser's path. His hand outstretched, a swirling sphere of black chakra, a truth-seeking orb, materializing to effortlessly absorb the attack. I'm not letting you kill these people, Admiral, Naruto said. His voice dangerously low. Ooh, then I suppose this is no longer a test, Kizaru replied, his whole body beginning to glow. It's a lesson. He vanished. Naruto's Sage Mode screamed a warning. A kick, moving at the literal speed of light, was aimed at his head. He ducked under it, the air sizzling where his face had been. Kizaru was relentless, a phantom of yellow light, pepper-ing him with laser blasts and intangible, light-speed strikes. Naruto was a blur of motion, dodging, parrying, using his sage-enhanced senses to predict attacks an instant before they launched. He couldn't land a hit. Every punch phased through the Admiral's light form. Kizaru reappeared 20 yards away, a finger aimed at Naruto's heart. It's useless. You can't touch me. Who said I was trying to touch you? Naruto grinned. He slammed his hand down on the balcony floor, not a punch, but a focused infusion of sage chakra. Sage art. Resonating earth scream. He wasn't targeting Kizaru. He was targeting the island itself. The entire castle was built on a massive deposit of the energy-conducting crystals. Flooded with raw nature energy, they began to vibrate violently. The air filled with a deafening, discordant hum. The very light seemed to bend and warp around them. For a single, infinitesimal moment, the chaotic energy field disrupted Kizaru's control over his devil fruit. His intangible form flickered, forced solid by the overwhelming resonance. It was all the time Naruto needed. In that instant, he was there, a simple steel kunai held gently against the Admiral's throat. The chaotic hum died down. The air fell silent. Checkmate. Kizaru froze. He looked down at the blade, then up at Naruto's ice-cold eyes. The lazy, amused mask was completely gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated astonishment. And then, something else. Respect. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Ooh, scary, he breathed, the words filled with a strange sort of delight. And very, very interesting. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. The lesson was over. He had been the student. With the situation resolved, Naruto did not linger. He presented the people of Averone with the bound and gagged Baron Vane, along with the man's own ledgers detailing his crimes against them. He didn't appoint a new leader, he simply told them to choose one for themselves. Before he left, the rebel leader, a grizzled old miner with hands like stone, grabbed his arm. The Baron, he made us dig deep. Deeper than was safe. Some of the men, they went mad down in the darkness. They said they heard whispers from the rock. An old god, sleeping in the heart of the island. It promised them power, promised to shatter their chains if they would just dig a little deeper and set it free. The chill that ran down Naruto's spine was colder than any of Kizaru's attacks. The Hollow King. The Void Sovereign. Its influence was everywhere, a poison seeping into the world's most desperate places. He returned to the warship alone. Kizaru was back in his deck chair, eyes closed, but Naruto knew he wasn't sleeping. He had given the world government his answer. Hours later, he walked back into the pavilion of tranquil skies. Kalia was waiting, pacing anxiously in the main hall. She stopped when she saw him, her hands clasped to her chest, her face a mask of worry. He met her gaze from across the vast marble floor and gave her a tired, but triumphant, smile. He hadn't just passed their test. He had broken the curve. He had shown them his power, his compassion, and his utter refusal to be their weapon. He was his own force, and Mary Geoise would just have to learn to live with it. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Halls of Power. The news of Navarone did not arrive in Mary Geoise as a report. It arrived as a shockwave. It wasn't the liberation of the island that caused the tremor. The world government could crush a dozen Navarones before breakfast. It was the public humbling of an admiral and the utter, contemptuous disregard for the Gorose's implicit orders. Naruto Uzumaki had not been a scalpel. He had been a sledgehammer, but one that had performed a surgeon's work. Smashing the problem and resetting the bone in a way that left the five elders with no clean path for retribution. In their hallowed, windowless chamber, the atmosphere was colder than stone. He made a mockery of our authority. The bald elder with the sword stated, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. His hand rested on the hilt of his kidetsu blade, as if he wished to solve the problem personally. He neutralized a threat, disarmed a corrupt noble, and did so without a single reported casualty, countered the tall elder with the birthmark, his tone one of cool, pragmatic analysis. The official report from Kizaru is glowing. It paints Uzumaki as a paragon of efficiency and controlled power. Kizaru is amused. The elder in the flat cap hissed. He sees this not as an insult, but as a fascinating new game. That man's apathy will be our undoing. The lead elder with the long white hair, the one who so often steered their consensus, steepled his fingers. We cannot punish him. He did not disobey the letter of his orders, only the spirit. To move against him now, especially after Kizaru's report, would make us look weak and reactionary. It would reveal our hand, that we desire a butcher, not a peacekeeper. So what do we do? The fifth, stoic elder finally spoke. The asset is uncontrollable. He cannot be leashed. A beast that cannot be leashed by force, the lead elder mused. His ancient eyes distant, must be guided by other means. We have focused on the man. We should have been focusing on his new wife. A celestial dragon princess holds more power in these halls than any army. We will isolate him, turn his own status against him. Let the nobles of Mary Geoise, with their pride and their paranoia, become the bars of his cage. The chill from the G. Orisei's chamber seemed to seep through the very marble of the pavilion of tranquil skies. The servants became more scarce. The glances from the ever-present CP0 agents grew longer, colder. Naruto and Kalia were being ostracized, placed in a silent, political quarantine. They won't challenge you with force again, Kalia said, pacing the length of their hidden library. She had shed her ornate gown for a simpler, more practical dress. A sign of her own quiet rebellion. They will use the one weapon this city was built upon, status. Let them try, Naruto said, balancing on one finger atop a stack of precarious books. A meditative exercise that calmed his restless energy. Words don't break bones. You don't understand, she countered, stopping to face him, her amethyst eyes intense. Here, words are sharper than any sword. They can strip you of allies, poison your reputation, and leave you utterly alone before the blade ever falls. They will paint you as a barbarian, an upstart who threatens their divine right. They will use that fear to turn everyone against us, including my father's few supporters. She gestured to the scrolls and books around them. History is not written by the righteous, Naruto. It is written by those who control the narrative. Her words proved prophetic. Invitations to social gatherings ceased. When they walked through the immaculate gardens, other nobles would turn, whispering behind their fans before abruptly changing their path. The pressure was subtle but immense, a constant, suffocating blanket of disapproval. The primary source of this venom was a family known as the Nerona. Their patriarch, Saint Tiberius Nerona was a man carved from old prejudices and ambition, with eyes that held the cold certainty of a true believer. He saw the old ways, the absolute, unquestioned divinity of the celestial dragons, as sacred. Naruto's presence was a blasphemy, and Kalia's family, with their reformist whispers, were heretics. Naruto first saw him at the Court of Divine Edicts, a farcical gathering where nobles debated trivial matters with life or death seriousness. Tiberius spoke with a chilling charisma, his words weaving a tapestry of fear. He spoke of tradition, of purity, of the dangers of inviting foreign filth into their sacred bloodlines, his eyes flicking to Naruto for just a moment. He never mentioned Naruto by name, but everyone in the room knew who the sermon was about. The other nobles nodded in agreement, their fear and bigotry stroked by his rhetoric. That night, Kalia's face was grim. Tiberius is making his move. He sees this as an opportunity to discredit my father and seize control of the hardliner faction. He is dangerous because he truly believes what he says. People who talk that much are usually hiding something, Naruto noted. His senses on high alert, he began his own silent investigation, while Kalia used her position to navigate the treacherous social currents, gathering whispers from terrified servants and reading between the lines of official pronouncements. Naruto became a ghost. He used his shadow clones, undetectable to all but the most advanced Kanbunshoku Haki, to observe the Nerona estate. He didn't need to break in. His clones, disguised as dust motes or shadows, could slip through keyholes and cling to ceilings, perfect, silent spies. The information they gathered painted a disturbing picture. Tiberius was holding secret meetings, not with politicians, but with zealous traditionalists and the fanatical leaders of the Holy Knights, the personal army of the celestial dragons. The talk was always of purification, of cutting out the disease that threatened Mary Geoise. And then Naruto sensed something else. Deep within the Nerona estate, hidden in a soundproofed, subterranean chamber, was a strange, corrupting energy. It was faint, a sickly sweet whisper of power that felt disturbingly familiar. It was the same taint he'd felt on Navarone, the same subtle madness that the miners had spoken of. He relayed this to Kalia. Her eyes widened in horror. The whispers, she breathed. He's listening to the whispers of the Void Sovereign. He thinks it's a divine voice, an ancient god of the celestial dragons, promising to restore their power. The plot, when it began to form, was more insidious than they could have imagined. Through their combined intelligence, a servant's overheard comment, a clone's observation of a map, Kalia's understanding of her father's schedule, they pieced it together. A grand ball was to be held in honor of the visiting monarch of Dressrosa. Kalia's father, Saint Gerald, was scheduled to give the opening address. The Nerona family was in charge of the security. It was the perfect stage. They will try to kill him, Kalia stated, her voice trembling but her eyes hard. They will use a weapon that can be traced back to you, something foreign, something that screams, outsider. They will kill my father and frame you for it in one move. The Gorosei will have no choice but to order your execution, and Tiberius will rise to power as the man who saved them from the traitor and the barbarian. The night of the ball arrived, cloaking Mary Geoise in a deceptive layer of civility. The grand hall was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and shimmering gowns. The air was thick with perfume, ambition, and the cloying sweetness of expensive wine. Naruto, dressed in a simple, well-tailored black suit Kalia had insisted upon, looked dangerously out of place, a panther in a room full of peacocks. He stood by her side, their silent calm. Unication a stark contrast to the meaningless chatter that surrounded them. Kalia was a vision in a deep violet gown, her face a mask of regal calm, but Naruto could feel the frantic beating of her heart. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. I'm here. We've got this. She squeezed back. I know. They watched as Tiberius moved through the crowd, a magnanimous host accepting praise, all while his eyes darted about, checking his pieces on the board. Naruto's sensory abilities were stretched to their absolute limit, filtering through the emotions of 1,000 people, searching for the spike of killing intent. The telltale sign of an assassin. His clones were everywhere, disguised as waiters, hidden in the rafters, even one posing as an ice sculpture. Kalia's father, a kind-looking man with weary eyes, took the stage. He began his speech, his voice a calm plea for understanding and tolerance in a changing world. It was a speech that signed his death warrant in the eyes of men like Tiberius. Naruto felt it first, a flicker of intent from a balcony overlooking the stage. High above, hidden behind a velvet curtain, one of Tiberius's holy knights raised a uniquely crafted crossbow. The bolt was not of wood or steel, but of a dark, obsidian-like material that pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy, sea stone, carved with foreign markings. It was the perfect evidence. But Naruto had planned for this. He didn't move, he didn't shout. Instead, he met Kalia's eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Now, Kalia, with the poise of a queen, took a single step forward, her voice ringing out with practiced clarity. Cutting through her father's speech. Saint Tiberius, a moment of your time, if you please. Every head turned. To interrupt a formal address was a shocking breach of etiquette. Tiberius froze. His plan momentarily derailed. He turned to Kalia, his face a mask of confusion and barely concealed rage. Princess Kalia, what is the meaning of this? I was just admiring the diligence of your security. Kalia said, her voice sweet as honeyed poison. She pointed a graceful finger up at the exact balcony where the assassin was hidden. So diligent, in fact, that one of your knights seems to have found a drafty spot behind that curtain. Perhaps you should see to it. The assassin panicked. He had been seen. He had been exposed. He made a split-second, fatal decision. He fired. The crowd gasped as the black bolt shot towards the stage. But Naruto was already there. He hadn't moved from his spot, but one of his clones, disguised as a decorative suit of armor near the stage, burst into action. It moved in a blur, not to intercept the bolt, but to shove St. Gerald to the ground. The seastone bolt, robbed of its target, slammed into the wall behind the stage with a sickening thud. Simultaneously, another clone dropped from the rafters, landing silently behind the assassin, a kunai already at his throat. And on the main floor, the ice sculpture of a swan melted away to reveal a third clone, who calmly held up a small, perfectly preserved Den Den Mushi. It began to broadcast a recording. Tiberius's voice filled the stunned silence of the hall, cold and clear. Quote. The bolt is untraceable to us. The markings are from the Wano country. When the outsider is implicated in the death of the fool Gerald, the Gorosei will have their justification. I will be seen as the savior of our sacred world. The recording clicked off. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned from the sputtering Den Den Mushi to the pale, horrified face of Saint Tiberius Nerona. He was trapped, exposed. His own words, his executioner. Naruto stepped forward, no longer a silent observer but a judge. He looked at Tiberius, his blue eyes holding no anger, only a profound, disappointed pity. You talked about purity, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. But you were listening to poison. That voice you thought was a god. It's just a parasite, feeding on your fear. And it drove you to do this. He didn't need to raise a hand. The other celestial dragons, for all their bigotry, understood high treason. The holy knights, their loyalty to their commander severed by his public disgrace, moved in, their faces grim. Tiberius didn't even fight. He simply stared at Naruto, his mind broken, whispering about a promised kingdom that would now never come. The ball was ruined. The political landscape of Mary Geoise was shattered. But Naruto and Kalia were safe. Later, in the quiet of their balcony, they watched the dawn break over the red line. They had not just survived, they had won. They had taken the enemy's plan and turned it into a weapon, exposing the rot at the heart of the hardliner faction. They will see you differently now, Kalia said softly, her shoulder brushing against his. Not just as a beast, but as a mind. A strategist. That may be even more dangerous to them. Good, Naruto said, a small smile playing on his lips. Let them be scared. They had weathered the first political storm. They had proven they were a force to be reckoned with, not just in combat, but in the halls of power. But as Naruto looked out at the vast world below, he knew this was just the beginning. They had exposed a traitor, but they had also confirmed the existence of a far greater enemy, one that whispered in the dark and promised power to the desperate. The lines were drawn, not just in Mary Geoise, but across the world. And they were standing right in the middle of them. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Revolutionaries' Gambit. The Gorosei's Solu. Chion to their Naruto problem was to give him a change of scenery. Under the guise of a diplomatic tour to strengthen the bonds between the Holy Land and its protectors, he and Kalia were dispatched to Marine Base G5. A notorious bastion of rough-and-tumble justice located squarely in the volatile New World. The move was politically brilliant. It removed Naruto from the delicate chessboard of Mary Geoise, placing him in an environment where his particular brand of destructive problem-solving could be aimed at the world government's external enemies. Out of sight, out of mind. G5 was a chaotic, brutalist fortress of steel and concrete, scarred by 100 battles and smelling perpetually of salt, sweat, and cheap cigars. The Marines stationed here were a far cry from the disciplined automatons of Marineford. They were a pack of barely leashed wolves, known for their viciousness towards pirates and their complete disregard for protocol. Yet, as Naruto walked the base, he sensed something he hadn't expected. A core of rough, unvarnished loyalty. They were vicious, but they were vicious in defense of each other and the civilians in their territory. They were not the polished, cruel enforcers of the celestial dragon's will, they were a bulwark against the new world's endless tide of anarchy. For Kalia, it was a culture shock of the highest order. She traded her silken gowns for a practical marine officer's coat worn over a simple dress, her hair tied back in a severe but efficient bun. She moved through the boisterous, rowdy base with an unshakable poise that baffled an S. Lowly earned the respect of the hardened soldiers. They had expected a fragile doll. They got a woman with a spine of tempered steel who could dissect a battle plan with the cold precision of a master strategist. Their third day on the base was deceptively calm. A hazy sun beat down on the courtyard where Naruto was sparring with Vice Admiral Smoker, the base commander. Smoker was a gruff, cigar-chomping man who seemed to trust no one. Least of all a supposed celestial dragon ally. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his Logia-type smoke fruit allowing him to turn into a dense, billowing cloud of smoke. A jeet tipped with seastone his only solid weapon. "You're holding back," Smoker growled, his smoky form lashing out with a white fist. Naruto, moving with an almost lazy grace, sidestepped the blow. "If I wasn't, we'd have to rebuild your base," he replied with a grin, easily deflecting the jeet with a forearm hardened by chakra. The fight was a dance of intangibility. Naruto's sheer speed versus Smoker's ethereal form. It was during a brief lull, as Smoker reformed his body, that the world went silent. It was a strange, oppressive silence that fell over the base, the kind that precedes a hurricane. The klaxons should have blared, but they didn't. The watchmen should have screamed, but they were quiet. Then came the explosion. A section of the base's outer wall, facing the sea, simply vanished in a bloom of silent, gray fire. It didn't make a sound. It was as if the noise itself had been erased. Before the dust even settled, they poured in. Figures cloaked in dark green, moving with a fluid, terrifying synchronicity. They were not pirates, loud and chaotic. They were soldiers. The Revolutionary Army. A thick, unnatural fog, smelling of ash and cinders, rolled across the base, obscuring vision and choking the air. It was a perfectly executed surprise attack. 2 arms. Smoker roared, his body already turning to smoke as he shot towards the breach. "Protect the comms tower." Naruto's sage senses flared, painting a picture of the battlefield in his mind despite the blinding ash. The revolutionaries were moving with brutal efficiency, not as a single mob but as multiple independent cells, each with a clear objective. Some were disabling cannons, others were storming the barracks, but the main force, a wedge of elite commandos, was cutting a direct path towards a squat, heavily fortified building at the center of the base, the Research and Development Lab. He slammed his hands together. In an instant, 100 shadow clones burst into existence, fanning out across the base. A wave of orange and black crashing against the tide of green. His orders were simple. Protect the Marines, disable the enemy, no killing. Kalia, who had been observing the sparring match, was already moving. "The ash is a distraction and a delivery system," she shouted over the rising din of battle, her voice sharp and clear as she sprinted towards the command center. "It's a Logia user's ability. They're using it to mask their movements. They're not here for a random raid, this is a surgical strike." Naruto shot towards the R&D lab, a Rasengan already forming in his palm. A swirling vortex of controlled power. He needed to stop the head of the snake. He arrived to find the lab's reinforced durasteel doors melting into slag. Standing before the breach was the source of the ash. It was a woman, tall and lean, with short-cropped silver hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky. She wore the standard revolutionary uniform, but with an officer's coat that billowed around her like a thundercloud. Her hands were wreathed in black ash that seemed to drink the very light. She turned as Naruto approached, her expression calm, almost academic. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice a low, raspy alto. "The ghost of Navarone. I admit, I hope to meet you. I am Silas." "You have a funny way of asking for an introduction," Naruto replied, his Rasengan spinning with an audible hum. "We don't have time for pleasantries," Silas said. She made a gesture, and the ash around her swirled, forming a dozen sharp, obsidian-like spears that shot towards him. Naruto met them head-on. The Rasengan dissipated the ash spears like they were nothing more than smoke. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, his fist cocked back. Silas's body dissolved into a torrent of ash, his punch passing through empty air. She reformed behind him, a leg coated in what looked like hardened volcanic rock, an advanced form of Busoshoku haki, swinging for his head. It was a battle of concepts. Naruto's raw power and precognition against her intangible form and tactical brilliance. She used her ash to create clones, to blind his senses, to form weapons from the very air. He ed his sage mode to see through her deceptions, his clones to counter her numbers, and his incredible speed to keep her on the defensive. They moved in a blur, a whirlwind of orange and gray at the heart of the larger battle. "Why are you doing this?" Silas demanded, her body flowing like smoke to avoid a sweeping kick. "You fight for justice. I've read the reports. You stood against your own allies to protect the innocent. Yet here you are, defending a fortress of the very tyrants we seek to overthrow." "I'm defending people," Naruto shot back, a clone he'd left underground grabbing her ankle as she reformed, forcing her to disperse again. "These Marines aren't all monsters. They're just soldiers, doing a job. Their job is to uphold a system that allows your wife's family to own people as slaves." Silas countered, appearing above him, her hands clasped together for a devastating axe kick. "There is no middle ground, Uzumaki. You either stand with the oppressed, or you are a shield for the oppressor." Their fight took them across the base, a whirlwind of destruction that left craters in the ferroconcrete. From the command tower, Kalia watched on the monitors, her mind racing. She directed Marine forces, cutting off revolutionary cells, exploiting the weaknesses in their otherwise perfect assault. She was their impromptu general, her cool, strategic mind a perfect foil to Silas's tactical chaos. Naruto finally found his opening. He realized Silas had to become solid for an instant to use her haki-infused attacks. He anticipated her next strike, not with his eyes, but the feel of the nature energy in the air. As she materialized for a decisive blow, he didn't counter with a punch. He simply placed his hand on her chest. Sage art. Amphibian technique. He injected a current of nature energy directly into her. It didn't harm her, but it disrupted her connection to her devil fruit, like static on a radio frequency. Her ash form sputtered. For a critical second, she was just a woman. Solid and vulnerable. He used the opportunity not to strike, but to pin her, his grip like iron. "It's over," he said, his voice low. Silas didn't struggle. She looked him in the eye, and there was no fear. Only a strange, burning disappointment. "You are so much stronger than them," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But you can't see the truth. You can't win by fixing a few broken pieces of a machine that was designed to grind people into dust. And your solution is to just smash the whole machine," Naruto challenged. "What about the people who get caught in the gears when you do?" A faint, chilling smile touched her lips. "War has a price, but our victory is now assured. The gods of Mary Geois are old and decadent. We have a new benefactor. One who understands true power. A voice that promises not reform, but true liberation. A god for the godless." Naruto's blood ran cold. Kalia's voice suddenly crackled through a nearby comm unit, dropped by a fallen Marine. "Naruto, it's a trap. The lab wasn't the target. It was a feint. They're after the prison block. They're not freeing prisoners, they're retrieving one specific prisoner." Silas's smile widened. A new convert to our cause. Quote, with a final, desperate surge of will, she forced her body back into ash, exploding away from Naruto's grasp. At the same moment, a flare of green light shot into the sky from the far side of the base. The signal. Instantly, the revolutionary forces disengaged. Their retreat was as disciplined and efficient as their attack. They fell back, covering each other, melting back into the ash fog which now rolled out towards the sea. Silas gave Naruto one last look. This world is dying, Uzumaki. Our benefactor is simply hastening the process. When you finally realize you cannot save it, we will be waiting. She dissolved into the ash and was gone. Naruto stood in the smoking, groaning remnants of the base. The battle had lasted less than 30 minutes. The cost was high. Dozens of injured Marines, a breached wall, and a gaping hole in their sense of security. He had fought against people whose ideals he couldn't entirely condemn, and in the end, he had still failed to stop them. He met up with Kalia near the now empty prison block. Smoker was there, his face grim, chewing on the soggy stump of his cigar. They took one man, Smoker growled. A scientist we captured last month. Said he was part of some fringe cult, was trying to build a device to amplify prayers. We thought he was a lunatic. Kalia knelt, examining a strange, faint symbol, scorched into the floor of the empty cell. It was a spiraling, chaotic pattern, similar to the ancient text she'd seen in the Forbidden Archives. He wasn't a lunatic, she whispered, her face pale. He was a priest. That voice, that benefactor, the Void Sovereign isn't just whispering to the desperate and the power-hungry anymore. It's building an army. It's recruiting. Naruto looked out at the sea, where the last of the ash fog was dissipating. He had come to this world to face a threat to the world government. He now understood that the government, and even the revolutionaries, were just symptoms of the disease. The real enemy wasn't a side in a war. It was the entity fanning the flames from the shadows, offering power to both sides, eagerly waiting to consume whatever was left in the ashes. His mission was no longer about reforming a corrupt system. It was about saving the entire world from a creeping, insidious madness that was turning everyone into a monster. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Descent into the Depths. The sterile air of Mary Geoise felt different after G5. It felt thin, brittle. The pristine marble floors seemed to cover a hollow space, a deep and resonant darkness that Naruto could now almost hear. The whispers the miners on Navarone had heard, the dark gospel Silas had preached, it wasn't just a creeping madness at the fringes of the world. It was a cancer radiating from its very heart. Kalia was a woman possessed. She retreated to their hidden archive, spending every waking moment poring over the brittle scrolls and forbidden texts. The symbol from the G5 prisoner's cell was her Rosetta Stone. A key that unlocked a new, terrifying layer of the history she thought she knew. She ate little, slept less, her amethyst eyes burning with a feverish intensity as she cross-referenced star charts, architectural blueprints of the Pangaea Castle, and cryptic, allegorical poems from the Void Century. Naruto found her on the third day, surrounded by a fortress of open books. A single glowing pearl casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. She was tracing a complex diagram with a trembling finger. It was a rendering of the Pangaea Castle, but its show wed a detail he'd never seen on any official map. A network of passages descending from its foundations, spiraling downward like the roots of a dead tree, all converging on a single point deep within the earth. I've found it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. It's not a legend, it's real. She pointed to the symbol, a chaotic, spiraling eye, drawn at the diagram's terminus. The chamber of the void. The texts call it the Pancration. The place of all power and all struggle. It's not a prison, Naruto. It's a fulcrum, a nexus. The 20 founders didn't just build their castle on this holy land. They built it directly on top of this wound. Her eyes met his, wide with a mixture of terror and grim certainty. The seal the legends speak of, the seal of 20 keys, the keys, are the thrones themselves. The thrones in the empty throne room. They aren't just symbols of unity. They are a focusing apparatus for the collective will, or haki, of the 20 royal families. It's a psychic lock. A cold dread settled in Naruto's stomach. And the celestial dragons have been abandoning their duties for centuries, he finished, the pieces clicking into place. They've grown decadent, weak. The lock is failing. It's worse than that, Kalia said, her voice dropping lower. The whispers, they aren't just a sign of the seal weakening. They're a weapon. The Sovereign is using them to sow chaos. To make the world tear itself apart. The more fear and hatred there is, the weaker the psychic barrier becomes. We are living in the final stages of a planetary exorcism, and the demon is about to win. There was no other option. They couldn't go to the Gorosei, who were either complicit or ignorant, both equally dangerous. They couldn't appeal to the Marines or even Kalia's father. His was a truth that would shatter the world's foundations. They had to see it for themselves. They had to know their enemy. That night, Mary Geoise slept under a blanket of false peace. Two shadows etched themselves from the balcony of the Pavilion of Tranquil Skies. Naruto, clad in a simple dark shinobi uniform he'd stored in a sealing scroll, moved with the silence of a falling leaf. Kalia, dressed in a practical, dark gray tunic and trousers, her hair braided tightly, followed in his wake, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was not a frontal assault. It was a pure infiltration into the most heavily guarded fortress on the planet. The main entrance is under the empty throne room, Kalia whispered as they navigated the rooftops, the moonlight painting the world in shades of silver and black. But it will be guarded by the holy knights. There is another way, a servant's passage, sealed for centuries, connected to the old aqueduct system. She was their guide, her encyclopedic knowledge of the castle's hidden architecture, their map. Naruto was their key. He used his sage abilities to sense the patrol routes of the CP0 agents, the blind spots in their surveillance. The subtle ebbs and flows of the castle's energy. They moved through forgotten corridors and behind ancient tapestries, a pair of ghosts in the machine of power. They reached the sealed passage, a simple stone archway bricked up and forgotten behind a wine cellar. Naruto placed his hand on the wall. He didn't punch it. He channeled a fine, precise thread of chakra into the mortar, vibrating it at a high frequency until it crumbled into dust. The bricks came loose with no more than a soft whisper. The air that hit them from the darkness beyond was ancient, cold, and heavy with the weight of absolute silence. It smelled of petrified stone and ozone. The descent was claustrophobic, a journey into the planet's subconscious. The spiraling staircase was carved from the living rock of the Red Line. Each step worn smooth by the passage of time. The only light came from a small, glowing Rasengan Naruto held in his palm, a miniature sun that pushed back the oppressive darkness. The forgotten defenses were subtle and insidious. They passed through a chamber where the very air seemed to deaden their senses, a strange energy field that tried to sever Naruto's connection to nature and cloud Kalia's mind. Naruto had to actively pump sage chakra into the air around them, creating a protective bubble just to allow them to think clearly. Further down, a wide chasm blocked their path. On the far side, a dozen statues of ancient warriors, their faces impassive, stood guard. As they approached, the statues' eyes glowed with a malevolent blue light. They weren't proto-pacifistas, they were worse. They were golems, animated by a sliver of the sovereign's own will, their stone bodies impossibly dense. We can't fight them, Kalia breathed, recognizing a pattern on the floor from her research. It's a puzzle. The trial of kings. A test of worthiness. The floor was a grid of tiles, each bearing a different crest. Kalia, her mind sharp despite the pressure, directed Naruto's movements. Step on the Nefertari crest. Then the Don Quixote. Avoid the Nerona. They were always traitors. It was a deadly dance, a misstep causing the golems to stir and the chasm to groan threateningly. They worked in perfect sync. Her knowledge and his flawless physical execution, and passed the trial without waking the stone guardians. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the staircase ended. She opened into a space that was fundamentally wrong. The chamber of the void was not a room. It was an impossibility. It was a vast, spherical cavern that seemed to stretch into infinity, yet felt crushingly close. The walls, if they could be called that, shimmered with a faint, sickly purple light, like the inside of a diseased pearl. Gravity felt optional. Chunks of rock floated in the dead air. There was no sound, yet the silence was a deafening scream. And in the center of it all was the seal. It was a colossal sphere of solidified energy, 100 meters in diameter, black as a hole in reality. Cracks, like jagged bolts of lightning, marred its surface, leaking a visible, inky black ore that drifted into the void like smoke. Surrounding it were 20 massive, throne-like pillars of a crystalline material. Each one aimed at the sphere. These were the keys. As Kalia had predicted, most were dark, but a few, like the one representing the Alabasta Kingdom, still pulsed with a faint, defiant golden light. The seal was failing. As they drew closer, the psychic pressure became immense. It was a feeling of cosmic despair, of eons of rage and a hunger so profound it threatened to swallow their very consciousnesses. And then, it spoke. Not with a voice, but with a presence that bloomed inside their minds, a thought that was not their own. Less than so, the little mice have found their way to the heart of the trap. Greater than asterisk, the presence felt ancient, intelligent, and deeply, deeply amused. A shape began to coalesce from the leaking aura, not a monster, but a perfect, humanoid silhouette of pure darkness, a being of anti-light. Naruto instinctively moved in front of Kalia, his body flaring with the golden chakra of his six paths sage mode, a beacon of life and warmth against the soul-crushing cold. Less than brave, but foolish. You fight for a world that is already mine. A world built on my power, my sacrifice. The 20 kings did not defeat me. They bargained with me. Greater than. Visions flooded their minds, unbidden and horrifically clear. They saw the end of the void century. The 20 kings, battered and losing their war against the great kingdom, standing before this same entity. They saw the making the pact, offering the world as a sacrifice in exchange for the power to win. The thrones, the castle, the world government itself, it was all just the gilded cage they built to contain the devil they'd sold their souls to. The sovereign turned its psychic attention to Kalia. Less than you, little princess of the false gods. You despise your lineage. I can give you justice. I can give you the power to burn Mary Geois to the ground. To wash the world clean of your family's sins. You can build a new world of perfect equality from the ashes. A world where no one ever has to bow again. Simply let go. Greater than. Kalia screamed in her mind as the vision was forced upon her. She saw herself on the empty throne, the world remade by her will. She saw Charlos and Rosward groveling at her feet before being turned to dust. The power was seductive, a siren song of perfect, righteous vengeance. She felt her resolve cracking under the sheer weight of the temptation. Then the sovereign focused on Naruto. The psychic assault was different. It didn't offer power, it offered peace. The cavern vanished. He was standing in Konoha, under a warm sun. Iruka was clapping him on the shoulder. Kakashi was giving him a lazy eye smile. Sakura and Sasuke were arguing good-naturedly beside him. He could smell Ichiraku ramen. It was home. It was real. Less than you do not belong here, child of another star. You are weary. You have fought enough. Let me send you back. Let me give you the peace you have earned. This world is not your burden. Let it burn. Just rest. Greater than. Naruto's heart ached with a loneliness so profound it almost brought him to his knees. The vision was everything he wanted. To go home. To be done. He felt his golden chakra cloak flicker and dim. Naruto. Kalia's voice, a real, desperate shout, cut through the illusion. She had clawed her way out of her own temptation, her face pale and streaked with tears, but her eyes were blazing with defiance. It's a lie. A beautiful lie. Don't listen. Her cry was the anchor he needed. He roared, forcing the full power of his sage mode outward, a sun erupting in the darkness. The vision of Konoha shattered like glass. He was back in the cavern. The dark Silho, Ute of the Sovereign seemed to recoil slightly, not from the power, but from the sheer, indomitable will behind it. My friends, my world, they wouldn't want a peace that was bought with the ashes of another, Naruto snarled. His voice a mixture of his own and the deep, guttural growl of Kurama. Less than a noble sentiment. It will die with you. Greater than. The pressure intensified tenfold, but now they were fighting it together. Kalia, remembering a passage from a scroll about discordant truth, began shouting out the names of the 20 kings, the history of their betrayal, the details of their pact. Her words were like sharpened stakes, disrupting the sovereign's psychic monologue, forcing cracks in its oppressive hold. Naruto seized the opportunity. He formed 9 truth-seeking orbs, not as weapons, but as shields. He arranged them in a circle around himself and Kalia, a perfect sphere of absolute defense that nullified the entity's direct influence. "We have to go," he yelled. "We can't fight it. Not here." They fled. They ran from the chamber of a dying god, its mocking laughter echoing in their minds, promising them an inevitable, agonizing defeat. They scrambled back up the spiraling staircase, past the silent stone guardians and through the sense-deadening halls, the oppressive darkness of the deep earth nipping at their heels. They emerged through the bricked-up passage into the cellar just as the first rays of dawn pierced the high windows of Mary Geoy's. They were gasping for air, psychically battered, their souls feeling scraped raw. The opulence of the castle, the priceless vintages on the racks, the golden light of the new day, it all seemed like a grotesque, paper-thin facade. They had descended into the world's secret basement and looked upon the face of its true master. They now knew the enemy wasn't the Gorosei or the revolutionaries. The enemy was the very foundation upon which their world was built. Their mission was no longer a political game of reform. It was a desperate, hopeless battle against a primordial god, and they were utterly, terrifyingly alone. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Unholy Alliance. The sun rose over Mary Geoy's, but its light brought no warmth to the pavilion of tranquil skies. Naruto and Kalia were ghosts in their own home, haunted by the psychic echo of the entity they had faced. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured visions of a dark, hungry void and the suffocating peace of a home that was no longer his. Naruto found himself staring at his own hands, the golden chakra of the Sage of Six Paths now feeling less like a gift and more like a singular, lonely light in an encroaching, absolute darkness. Kalia was no better. The scholar who had devoured forbidden knowledge with an academic's zeal was now a witness who had read the final, horrifying chapter. The truth was a poison, and they had both drunk deeply. She would sit for hours, staring at the ancient scrolls, not reading them, but seeing the terrible reality between the lines. "We can't win," she said on the second day, her voice flat, devoid of its usual fire. They were on the balcony, the world spread out below them like a feast for a monster they couldn't see. What we faced down there, it wasn't just a powerful being. It was a fundamental force, like gravity or time. You can't punch gravity into submission. No, Naruto agreed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. But you can build a machine that flies. She turned to look at him, a flicker of her old spirit returning to her eyes. A machine? What are you talking about? Allies, he said simply. Weapons. A plan. We've been on the defensive since I got here. Playing their game, reacting to their moves. It's time we made our own. We need people who are strong enough to matter and smart enough to understand what's at stake. Quote, "Who?" Kalia challenged, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "The celestial dragons. They're either fools or, like Tiberius, actively courting the whispers. My father and his reformists. They're good men, but they fight with words and petitions. They'd break. The revolutionaries. Silas made it clear they've already chosen their new god. Who is left?" It was the question that had been circling Naruto's mind since their escape. The answer was a long shot, a gamble so reckless it bordered on insane. But it was the only one he had. Kizaru. Kalia stared at him as if he had just suggested they surrender. The admiral. The government's indifferent dog. The man who was ready to annihilate the people of Navarone without a second thought. "Are you mad?" "He's not a dog," Naruto countered, turning to face her fully, his expression serious. "A dog is loyal. He's not. He's not a zealot like Akainu, and he's not conflicted like Aokiji was. He's a pragmatist. The only thing he believes in is the status quo because it's easy and it lets him be lazy. The Void Sovereign is the ultimate threat to the status quo. It's a threat to his comfortable, boring world. He'll turn us into the Gorosei the moment we speak," she insisted. "No, he won't," Naruto said with certainty. "Because he's also the only person in this entire government who has seen what I can do up close and wasn't terrified. He was interested. He likes a good game, and we're about to show him the board for the biggest one in history. He's our only chance." The plan to contact him was a masterpiece of subtlety. Kalia, using her knowledge of naval deployments and encrypted communications, identified a 24-hour window where Kizaru would be on routine patrol near the Sabayati archipelago. Away from the prying eyes and ears of Mary Geoy's and Marineford. Naruto, in turn, dispatched a single, microscopic shadow clone, so small it was little more than a sentient speck of dust, that hitched a ride on a supply ship. The clone's only task was to find the admiral, wait for a moment when he was completely alone, and deliver a message. Not on a piece of paper, but by tracing 3 words into the condensation on a glass of tea Kizaru had left on his deck chair. Navarone. Whispers. Grove 13. It was a hook, an appeal to his curiosity and the only secret they shared. Grove 13 on Sabayati was a lawless, unmonitored zone. A place of pirates and slave traders. No one of Kizaru's rank would ever go there officially. It was the perfect neutral ground. Now, all they could do was wait and see if the fish would bite. 2 days later, they left Mary Gioi's, using an official visit to a naval hospital on Sabayati as their cover. They slipped away from their CP0 escort with an ease that was almost insulting. Naruto creating a diversion with a clone while he and Kalia melted into the chaotic, vibrant crowds of the archipelago. Grove 13 smelled of desperation and spilled rum. The air was thick with the shadows of the massive mangrove trees and the hushed, paranoid conversations of wanted men. They found the designated location. A dingy, forgotten bar at the end of a winding alley called the Stagnant Tide. Inside, it was dark and mostly empty, save for a few shady figures nursing their drinks in the corners. They took a booth in the back and waited. Every minute that stretched by felt like an hour. Kalia's leg bounced nervously under the table. What if he hadn't come? What if he'd brought a fleet with him? Ooh, my, a familiar, drawling voice said from right beside them. You two certainly know how to pick a vacation spot. The decor is so rustic. They both jumped. Kizaru was simply there, sitting in the booth with them, a glass of something amber in his hand. He hadn't entered through the door. He hadn't announced his presence with a flash of light. He had just appeared, a testament to the terrifying mastery he had over his power. He was not in his admiral's uniform, but a simple, almost tacky yellow shirt and white trousers, looking more like a retired tourist than a weapon of mass destruction. Admiral, Kalia said, her voice tight. Please, Kizaru sighed, taking a slow sip. Here, I'm just a concerned citizen. A very, very concerned citizen. Your message was intriguing and incredibly reckless. I should arrest you both just for being here. His eyes, lazy and half-closed, held a glint of something sharp and dangerous. So, talk. Why have you risked starting a war with your own government to have a drink with me in this charming little sewer? Kalia took the lead. She laid it all out, her voice low and steady, her words precise and stripped of emotion. She spoke of the Void Century, of the 20 kings and their pact. She spoke of the chamber of the void beneath Mary Gioi's and the failing psychic seal of the thrones. She described the entity they had faced, not as a monster, but as a strategic threat, a conscious, intelligent being with a plan to reclaim the world. Kizaru listened without interruption, his lazy expression never changing. He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. It was impossible to tell if he was bored, intrigued, or planning their execution. When she finished, the silence was heavy. Kizaru drained his glass and set it down softly. A primordial, soul-eating god from Bay. OND the stars is sleeping in the Gorosei's basement, and it's about to wake up because your ancestors were terrible at keeping promises, he summarized, his voice a flat, unimpressed drawl. Did I get that right? Ooh, scary. This isn't a joke. Naruto cut in, his voice hard. We felt it. Silas of the Revolutionary Army is actively recruiting for it. Its influence is spreading. It's the whisper. The soldiers and miners here before they go insane. It's a psychic plague, and it's patient. And why come to me? Kizaru asked, his gaze finally settling on Naruto. Why not your powerful father-in-law? Or the fleet admiral? Why trust the indifferent dog? Because you're the only one of them who's not a true believer, Naruto stated bluntly. Akainu would try to burn it with his absolute Jew. Stice and probably crack the planet in half. The Gorosei are too arrogant to admit they've lost control. The reformists are too weak. You, he leaned forward, his blue eyes intense, you don't care about justice or evil. You care about balance. You care about things staying the way they are. This thing is the end of everything. The end of the Marines, the end of the world government, the end of the sea. The sky, the end of lazy afternoons. A flicker of something, genuine, unfeigned emotion, crossed Kizaru's face. Naruto had hit the mark. He had appealed not to his duty or his morality, but to his fundamental nature. Kizaru was silent for a full minute. He seemed to be weighing the fate of the world with the same detached interest he might use to consider his lunch options. Finally, he gave a long, theatrical sigh. This is all going to be such a hassle. He looked from Naruto to Kalia, his eyes suddenly sharp, stripped of all laziness. Let's say I believe this fantastic, world-ending bedtime story. What, precisely, do you want from me? Information, Kalia said immediately. Access. We're blind on the outside. We need to know what the world government knows about the sovereign's cults. We need access to naval intelligence, cipher poll reports. We need to know where the enemy is moving before they do. And we need an ally on the inside, Naruto added. Someone who can bend the rules, misdirect patrols. Lose key evidence. Someone who can stand with us when the time comes to fight. Ooh, you ask for so much, Kizaru drawled, leaning back in his seat. Treason, dereliction of duty, conspiracy, it all sounds like a great deal of paperwork. He held up a finger, and the tip began to glow with a soft, yellow light. And in return for this career suicide, you offer me, what? The chance to save a world I'm not entirely sure I'm that fond of. We offer you a chance to keep it, Kalia said, her voice ringing with conviction. A chance to save the board so you can keep playing your games. The light on Kizaru's finger brightened, illuminating the dark bar with a brilliant, menacing glare. The other patrons, sensing the shift in power, had long since fled. One final question, Kizaru said, his voice losing its drawl, becoming as sharp and clean as a beam of light. If we do this, and we fail, what happens? Then everything ends, Naruto said, his face grim. And the last thing you'll see is a hungry darkness that eats the light. The light on Kizaru's fingertip extinguished. He stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from his shirt. Very well, he said, sounding profoundly bored. I'm in. This is, without a doubt, the most interesting thing that has happened to me all century. He started walking towards the door. Do not contact me directly again. I will establish a secure channel. You will receive a package within a week. He paused at the door, turning back to them. And Naruto-san, try not to be so dramatic. It's unbecoming. And then he was gone, stepping out into the chaotic grove. Once more just a lazy tourist in a loud shirt. Naruto and Kalia sat in the silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving them exhausted. They had done it. They had gambled everything and won. They had their first, and most unlikely, ally. Their relief was short-lived. As they made their way back to their escort, a news coup flew past, dropping a paper at a nearby stand. The headline, in bold, stark letters, hit Kalia like a physical blow. Saint Gerald denounced as traitor. Celestial Reformist faction exposed. GOROSEI order immediate arrest. Kalia stumbled, grabbing Naruto's arm for support. Her face was ashen. The Gorosei, feeling their power challenged, had lashed out. They had cut the head off the snake of reform. Her father, her only real ally within the system, was gone. Their new, fragile alliance with Kizaru was no longer just a strategic advantage. It was their only lifeline in a world where they were now truly, and completely, alone. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Saint's Defiance. The news of her father's fall hit Kalia like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Saint Gerald, the quiet scholar, the gentle reformist, branded a traitor. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated move by the Gorosei to consolidate their power and sever her last remaining tie to the establishment. They weren't just isolating her anymore. They were systematically dismantling her entire world. A cold, terrifying rage began to burn in Kalia's chest, cauterizing the wound of her grief. They had spent weeks in the shadows, playing a game of whispers and secrets. And for what? Her father was imprisoned, their cause was in ashes, and the true enemy continued to spread its influence unchecked. The package from Kizaru arrived 4 days later, delivered by a stoic marine who seemed to know nothing of its contents. It was a simple wooden crate filled with canned fish. Hidden in a false bottom was a specially modified, black den mushi, its shell carved with a strange angular pattern. There was also a single, encrypted data disk. They took it to the hidden library, the one place they knew was safe. As Kalia worked to decrypt the disk, Naruto examined the snail. It was dormant, its eyes closed. As he touched it, sending a small pulse of chakra into its shell, its eyes snapped open, glowing with a faint yellow light. A one-way, untraceable line to their new, unpredictable ally. The data on the disk was a torrent of raw, unfiltered intelligence. It was everything they had asked for and more. Cipher poll reports on suspected cultist activity. Naval logs detailing strange disappearances near certain islands, and, most damningly, a series of heavily redacted internal memos from the Gorosei themselves. The memos spoke of containable psychic phenomena, and acceptable civilian losses to maintain societal stability. They know, Kalia whispered, her face illuminated by the eerie glow of the monitor. They've known for years, not the full truth, perhaps, but they know about the whispers, the madness. They haven't been trying to stop it. They've been trying to manage it, to cover it up. One file stood out. It was a tactical report on the kingdom of Lulusia, a small, unassuming nation in paradise. The reports detailed a massive surge in cult-like activity. The people, suffering from famine and poverty, had begun to worship a god of the deep, who promised them abundance and power. They had overthrown the monarchy and were now openly defying the world government. The symbol they painted on their flags was a crude, spiraling eye. Attached to the file was a single, terrifyingly simple order, signed by the 5 elders themselves. Objective: Lulusia Kingdom. Status: heretical. Sanction: obliteration. Asset: Buster Call. No, Kalia breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. A Buster Call? For what? For believing in the wrong god out of desperation. Naruto looked at the order, and a cold, familiar anger settled in his gut. A Buster Call. The indiscriminate, absolute destruction of an entire island by a fleet of 10 warships, ordered without trial or appeal. It was an instrument of terror, a message to the world: defy us, and you will cease to exist. They weren't just managing the problem. They were pruning it, burning the infected branches without a thought for the people who were the leaves. This was it, the final line. He looked at Kalia, at the horrified fury in her eyes, and saw his own convictions reflected back at him. They could not stay in the shadows any longer. They could not fight a Sheik plagued with secrets and whispers while the world's supposed protectors committed genocide. Kizaru, Naruto said, his voice a low command. He touched the black Den Mushi. Its eyes opened. Ooh, that was quick. The Admiral's lazy voice drawled from the snail. Did you enjoy the reading material? I found the part about acceptable losses to be particularly dry. They've ordered a Buster Call on Lulusia, Naruto said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. There was a moment of silence from the other end. Yes, Kizaru finally said, his tone lacking its usual amusement. Fleet is scheduled to arrive in 36 hours. It's messy. We're going to stop it, Kalia declared, her voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable resolve. Another pause, longer this time. Stop a Buster Call. Kizaru's voice was incredulous. Princess, do you understand what you are saying? That is not defiance. That is a declaration of war against the entire world. The world is already at war, Naruto countered. It just doesn't know it yet. We're choosing our side. Are you with us? This was the true test of their alliance. Not the sharing of secrets, but the moment of open rebellion. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of Kizaru's decision. This is going to be the death of me, the Admiral sighed, a sound of profound, cosmic weariness. The fleet is being led by Vice Admiral Doberman. He's a zealot, but predictable. He will approach from the east to use the morning sun to his advantage. I will develop a sudden and debilitating case of lower back pain that will require me to remain at Marineford for a few days. The rest, he finished, is up to you. Try not to get yourselves vaporized. It would make this all feel like a rather pointless exercise in treason. The snail's eyes closed. The line went dead. Naruto looked at Kalia. Her fear was a tangible thing, a tremor in her hands, but beneath it was a core of pure, unyielding steel. She was no longer just the scholar or the unwilling bride. She was a revolutionary, forged in the fires of betrayal and truth. This is the point of no return, he said softly. Once we do this, we can never go back. Good, she replied, her amethyst eyes blazing. I never want to go back. 36 hours later, the sun rose over the calm seas east of Luluja, its light glinting off the cannons of 10 marine battleships arranged in a grim, implacable crescent. Vice Admiral Doberman, a man whose scarred face was a permanent snarl, stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the condemned island. All ships, prepare to open fire on my command, he barked. Let the world see the price of heresy. The island was quiet, too quiet. From their vantage point, they could see the strange, spiraling symbols painted on the houses. The unsettling stillness in the streets. Just as Doberman raised his hand to give the order, a single, piercing whistle cut through the air. Every sailor on every ship froze, looking up. A tiny black dot was falling from the sky. It grew larger, resolving into a human figure, a man in black and orange, his golden hair like a beacon against the blue sky. He was surrounded by a blazing, sun-yellow aura of pure power. Naruto hit the water in the exact center of the naval formation with the force of a tactical weapon. The ocean itself erupted, a colossal waterspout 1,000 feet high, dwarfing the battleships. The shockwave tossed the massive vessels like toys in a bathtub, their perfect formation shattered, their cannons thrown wildly off target. He landed softly on the deck of Doberman's flagship, the water cascading off his chakra cloak. The Marines around him were a mixture of terrified and battle-ready, their swords and rifles aimed at the impossible man who had just fallen from the heavens. Stand down, Naruto said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. This island is under my protection. Leave, now. Protection. Doberman snarled, drawing his massive zanbato. This island is a festering sore of rebellion. And you are a traitor. Fire. Fire all cannons at him. The cannons on the flagship turned, aiming point blank at Naruto. He sighed. I really didn't want to do this. He held up one hand. 9 black spheres, the truth-seeking orbs, materialized, spinning lazily around him. With a flick of his wrist, they shot out, not towards the cannons, but towards the sea beneath the ships. He didn't need to destroy the fleet. He just needed to disarm it. He molded the orbs, expanding them into a massive, semi-solid cage of black chakra that enveloped the entire fleet, trapping them in a shimmering, inescapable net. Then, using his mastery of all 5 nature transformations, he turned the very ocean against them. He pulled the water from beneath the ships, creating a swirling, contained whirlpool inside the cage. The battleships, their hulls groaning in protest, were caught in the vortex, spinning helplessly, their cannons pointing uselessly at the sky or the sea. The entire naval fleet, the ultimate symbol of the world government's power, had been neutralized in under a minute. Without a single casualty. Doberman stared, his face a mask of apoplectic disbelief. His ultimate weapon had been turned into a merry-go-round. But Naruto's actions were only the first part of their plan. As the fleet was thrown into chaos, a small, unassuming fishing boat, which had been hiding behind a nearby rock formation, made its way towards Luluja's shore. On its deck stood Kalia, no longer in her marine coat or royal gowns, but in the simple, practical clothes of a commoner. With her was a modified Den Den Mushi, its shell connected to an amplifier. She had to see the people for herself. They were gaunt, their eyes holding a mixture of desperation and a feverish, unsettling faith. They gathered at the docks, not to fight her, but to stare, their gazes unfocused. They were not evil. They were broken people who had been offered a sliver of hope by a voice in the dark. She raised the Den Den Mushi to her lips, and her voice, amplified and clear, rolled across the island and, more importantly, across the open naval communication channels, which she knew were being monitored by every marine base and government agency in the world. People of the world, my name is Kalia. I was once known as a celestial dragon. A collective gasp went through the paralyzed fleet and across the airwaves. A celestial dragon, revealing her identity. It was unheard of. For 800 years, my family has called themselves your gods, she continued, her voice ringing with a passion she had never before allowed herself to show. We have lived in splendor while you have starved. We have preached justice while we practiced tyranny. This is the truth of your world government. It is a lie, built on a foundation of genocide and fear. She looked at the faces of the Lulusians, her heart aching for them. Today, they sent a fleet to destroy this island. Not because these people are pirates or revolutionaries, but because they dared to hope for something more than the scraps my family allowed them. They are here to burn the sick, rather than cure the disease. This is the justice of your gods. She paused, taking a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. But I am here to tell you that the age of false gods is over. I renounce my name. I renounce my blood. I am not a god. I am just a woman who believes in a world where no one has to kneel. A world where you are the masters of your own fate. Her final act was the most symbolic. Another one of Naruto's clones, disguised as a seagull, dropped a small package at her feet. She opened it, revealing the small, bubble-like helmet of a celestial dragon. With the whole world watching, she let it fall from her hands. It hit the stone dock and shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Join us," she cried, her voice breaking with the sheer, overwhelming emotion of her declaration. "Help us build a better world." A profound silence followed, broken only by the sound of the waves. Then, on the flagship, a young marine, no older than 18, dropped his rifle. He looked at the chaos around him, at the face of his snarling vice-admiral, and then at the distant figure of the woman on the shore. He ripped the marine insignia from his jacket and threw it into the sea. Another followed, then another. The act of defiance was small, but it was a spark. Across the world, from the revolutionary army's hidden bases to the palaces of kings, to the simple towns and villages, her message had been heard. The world had been given a new choice. Not between tyranny and anarchy, but between the old lie and a new, uncertain truth. Naruto, his work done, appeared beside Kalia on the shore. He looked down at the shattered remains of her helmet. She had done it. She had thrown a torch into the heart of the world's power structure. They were no longer reformists. They were fugitives. They were rebels. But as they stood together, watching the first seeds of a global revolution they had just sown, they were also, for the first time, truly free. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Gods Awakening. Kalia's broadcast was not a spark, it was a global detonation. In the royal courts of the world government-affiliated kingdoms, kings and queens watched in stunned, terrified silence. In the hidden dens of the revolutionary army, soldiers and commanders stared at the flickering image of a celestial dragon renouncing her divinity, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning, rapturous hope. On the streets of Logatown, a crowd gathered around a shop window, the chatter of the marketplace falling silent as her words echoed over the cobblestones. The world held its breath. And then it erupted. Uprisings, small at first, flared up in a dozen oppressed nations. A slave revolt in the Sabayati archipelago, a tax riot in a starving port town, a royal guard refusing to bow to a visiting noble. These were acts of defiance that would have been crushed and forgotten a week ago. But now, they were fueled by a new, impossible idea. The gods themselves were admitting their own corruption. Kalia's voice had given the desperate a name for their hope. But hope was not the only emotion flooding the world. For every soul inspired, another was terrified. In the churches and temples that preached the divinity of the celestial dragons, her words were blasphemy of the highest order. They saw it as a sign of the end, a holy war, the ultimate test of their faith. This global, chaotic surge of emotion, of raw, untamed hope and pure, unadulterated fear, was a psychic tidal wave. And it all flowed towards a single point on the planet, the foundations of Pangaea Castle. Deep beneath Mary Geoise, in the cold, impossible space of the Chamber of the Void, the seal of 20 keys groaned under the strain. For 800 years it had been a dam, holding back an ocean of cosmic hunger. The weakening faith of the celestial dragons had caused cracks. The rising tide of global chaos was now the earthquake that shattered it completely. With a sound that was not a sound, a silent, soul-screaming crack. The black sphere of solidified energy at the chamber's heart fractured. A single, hairline fissure of pure, anti-light raced across its surface. Then another, and another. The 20 crystalline thrones, the psychic anchors of the seal, overloaded. They flickered, sputtered, and went dark. The seal shattered. In their hallowed chamber, the Gorosei felt the psychic tremor as a physical blow. The ancient maps on their walls rattled, and a fine dust sifted down from the vaulted ceiling. They were not fools. They knew what this meant. "The seal is broken," the elder with the birthmark stated, his voice devoid of its usual calm, replaced by a grim, chilling certainty. "The girl," the bald elder snarled, his hand gripping his sword so tightly his knuckles were white. "Her Ode cast." The emotional surge, it was the final blow. "What are our orders?" the stoic elder asked, looking to their leader. The elder with the long white hair rose from his seat, his face a mask of terrible resolve. "We have guarded this secret for centuries. We have borne the weight of our ancestors' pact. We will not fall now. This is not a catastrophe. It is an opportunity." His words hung in the air, audacious and arrogant. "The world is in chaos," he continued, his voice regaining its commanding tone. "It requires a firm hand. A true God to remind it of its place. Our ancestors failed to control it. We will not. We are the 5 stars of this world's authority. We will command it. We will harness its power and forge a new, absolute order that will last for 10,000 years." It was the ultimate folly of the proud. A delusion born of centuries of unquestioned power. They truly believed they were the masters of their own house. They did not understand they were merely the caretakers of the monster in the basement. They strode with grim purpose to the empty throne room, the symbolic heart of their power. The air was already thick, charged with a strange, static energy that made their hair stand on end. The very marble seemed to hum with a discordant energy. A shadow was rising from the floor in the center of the room, a pillar of pure, inky blackness that did not reflect light, but consumed it. It was the leaking essence of the Void Sovereign, a physical manifestation of its re-emerging will. "By the authority of the pact," the lead elder commanded, his voice booming with the practiced authority of a god. "You are bound to serve the throne. We are its masters. You will bow to us." The pillar of darkness paused its ascent. It seemed to consider them. A presence filled the room, ancient and amused. "Less than masters." Greater than the voice echoed not in the air, but directly in their skulls, a sound of grinding galaxies and dying stars. "Less than you are but the descendants of the cattle who pledged their world to me for a trinket of power. The lease on your reality has expired." Greater than. The darkness lashed out. It was not a physical attack. It was an unmaking. The 5 elders, the most powerful men in the world, did not even have time to scream. The darkness washed over them, and they were simply gone. Their power, their hockey, their centuries of accumulated knowledge and authority were siphoned away. Absorbed into the rising entity like a drop of rain into a hungry ocean. The Void Sovereign was feeding, and its first meal was the gods of Mary Geoise. From the deck of their stolen naval vessel, miles away, Naruto felt it. It was a psychic scream that tore across the planet, a wave of pure, negative energy so powerful it made his sage senses reel. The sky above the red line, visible even from this distance, began to change. The placid, artificial blue of the sky dome fractured like glass, revealing a swirling, nauseating vortex of purple and black behind it. Mary Geoise, the Holy Land, was being devoured from within. What is happening?" Kalia gasped, gripping the ship's railing, her face ashen. "It's free," Naruto said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "The seal is gone." Before they could formulate a plan, a streak of brilliant yellow light shot across the sky, resolving itself on their deck. Kizaru coalesced, not in his lazy tourist attire, but in his full admiral's uniform. The lazy smile was gone. His face set in a grim, serious mask they had never seen before. "Ooh, my," he said, his voice stripped of all its usual affectation. "It seems my lower back pain has miraculously cleared up." He looked towards the grotesque transformation of the red line. "The Gorosei are gone. I can no longer sense them. And a psychic wave just swept through Marineford that has driven a third of the new recruits into a catatonic state." He turned to face them, his expression one of profound, cosmic annoyance. "My comfortable world is being disassembled. I am displeased." Their unholy alliance was no longer a secret. It was now a necessity. As if summoned by the crisis, another force appeared. A large, crow-themed ship, the flagship of the Revolutionary Army, emerged from a squall on the horizon. It did not fire. A figure was standing at its prow, a man with a scarred face and a dark, flowing cloak. Monkey D. Dragon. He had felt the psychic cataclysm as well, and his chief of staff, Silas, had recognized the energy signature of their benefactor. They now understood their mistake. They had been nurturing a viper that was poised to consume them all. An impromptu, desperate summit was held on the deck of Naruto's stolen ship. There were no pleasantries. Dragon, Kizaru, Kalia, and Naruto, the four corners of a new, impossible alliance. The entity you call the Void Sovereign is corrupting the holy city, Dragon said, his voice a low, rumbling thunder. My men who have been exposed to its influence are either mindless beasts or dead. This is not a liberator. It is an extinction event. We can't fight it from here, Naruto stated, his eyes locked on the corrupted peak. It's drawing power from the red line itself. We have to cut it off at the source. At the throne, it was a suicide mission. A frontal assault on the heart of a newly awakened god's power. My revolutionary captains can handle the perimeter, Dragon declared. They can fight the sea. Reachers its spawning and try to contain the corruption. But we can't get to the peak. We need a spearhead. How very dramatic, Kizaru sighed. He looked at Naruto. You and I are the only ones who can move fast enough to matter up there. He then glanced at Kalia. And you are the only one who knows the layout of that cursed place and the nature of the enemy. The plan was as simple as it was insane. Dragon's forces would create a diversion, a full-scale assault on the base of the corrupted Mary Geoise. Kizaru, Naruto, and Kalia would use the chaos to punch a hole straight to the top. The Holy Land was no longer recognizable. The elegant marble manors had twisted into pulsating, organic structures of black and purple stone. The perfectly manicured gardens were now forests of shrieking, fleshy flora. And the inhabitants, the celestial dragons and their guards who hadn't been consumed were transformed into monstrous thralls. They were puppets of their own worst desires, their arog, ants and cruelty given grotesque physical form. A noble who saw others as insects now scuttled on multiple, chitinous legs. A guard who lived for violence was now a mindless berserker of muscle and bone. This was the hell they had to climb. Kizaru became a living laser, a brilliant yellow comet that carved a path through the hordes. He moved with a speed and lethality he had never bothered to display before. His lazy demeanor replaced by a cold, deadly efficiency. Naruto was a whirlwind of golden energy, his shadow clones a veritable army that smashed through the ranks of thralls while he, the original, cleared the path ahead with recentricans that screamed through the twisted architecture. Kalia was their anchor. She wasn't a frontline combatant, but her mind was their sharpest weapon. The old aqueduct. It's structurally reinforced. It will lead us past the main nest. She would shout over the din. That creature, its core is exposed after it attacks. Aim for the chest. She saw the patterns in the madness. The logic in the nightmare, guiding their raw power with her tactical genius. They fought their way up the side of the red line, a desperate, vertical battle against a tide of insanity. They finally reached the peak, bursting into the ruins of the empty throne room. The room was a cavern of pulsating, black stone. And seated upon a newly formed throne of solidified void, was the sovereign. It had taken a form that was a perfect, beautiful mockery of a king. It was a tall, androgynous humanoid figure clad in shifting, cosmic darkness, its face a blank canvas of polished obsidian. Yet its presence radiated an ancient, terrifying intelligence. It regarded their ragged, battle-worn group with an air of regal amusement. It raised a hand, and the remaining thralls outside the chamber fell silent. Their assault ceasing. Less than the sage, the light, and the fallen saint, greater than its voice echoed in their minds. Less than the last antibodies of a dying world. You have fought so hard. You have struggled so valiantly. And for what? To preserve this. Greater than. The obsidian face of the sovereign swirled, showing them visions of the world's endless cycle of hatred, war, poverty, and prejudice. Less than this creation is a failure. It is a flawed, painful experiment. I offer you a gift. A final, perfect order. A universe of serene, absolute silence. Of peace. Greater than. Its non-gaze settled on Naruto. Less than you are the only other true power here. A spark from another reality. You see the flaws as I do. This is beneath you. Join me. We can unmake this broken clockwork and start anew. We can build a perfect reality, together. Why be a hero to ants when you can be a god of a new creation? Greater than. It was the ultimate temptation. Not of power, not of peace, but of purpose. The chance to fix everything, not by fighting an endless, losing battle, but by wiping the slate clean. Naruto looked at the entity on the throne. Then he looked at Kizaru, panting slightly, his pristine suit torn and smudged. He looked at Kalia, her face dirty, her eyes blazing with defiant fire, the last saint of a fallen world. He thought of the people of Lulusia, of Navarone, of the rowdy Marines at G5. Flawed, broken, chaotic people. His people. He turned back to the sovereign and a slow, confident grin spread across his face. "You're right. This world is a mess," Naruto said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. He flared his chakra, the golden cloak of the Sage of Six Paths erupting around him with the force of a star-going nova. "It's chaotic, and it's painful, and it's stupid. But it's theirs, and it's better than your perfect, empty nothing." He took a step forward, 9 truth-seeking orbs spinning into existence behind him like a halo of black suns. "So, thanks for the offer," he said, his eyes crackling with power. "But I'm going to have to say no." Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Dawn of a New Era. The Void Sovereign's obsidian face remained impassive, but the psychic pressure in the chamber dropped, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of something akin to disappointment. Less than so be it. The futile struggle for a flawed existence. It is a predictable, if pitiable, choice. Greater than. The entity did not rise from its throne. It simply lifted a hand. And the very fabric of the chamber's reality warped. The pulsating, black stone walls dissolved into a swirling, star-strewn vista of the void. They were no longer in a room, they were in a pocket dimension. A sliver of the sovereign's own essence where it held absolute dominion. "Ooh, this is problematic," Kizaru muttered, his body already shimmering, preparing to move. Before he could, the sovereign's voice echoed again, not in their minds, but with a true, physical sound that was the harmony of a billion dying stars. "Light is but a fleeting flicker in an endless dark. Tendrils of pure anti-light, physical manifestations of the void, erupted from the floor and walls. They were not fast, but they were inexorable. They did not destroy what they touched, they unmade it." Kizaru, in his light form, tried to phase through one. The tendril simply absorbed his light, causing him to flicker violently, forced back into a solid state with a pained grunt. His ultimate defense was useless here. "It's eating energy," Kalia shouted, her mind racing, piecing together the terrifying logic of their new prison. "Don't use your devil fruit. It will just feed it." Naruto acted instantly. He was not a devil fruit user. His power came from within, from the life force of the world and his own spirit. He was the antithesis of this place. He expanded his truth-seeking orbs, forming a defensive dome around the 3 of them, the black spheres of nullification the only thing that could hold the unmaking tendrils at bay. "We can't win a defensive battle," Naruto said, the strain of maintaining the shield already showing on his face. The sovereign was passively draining his chakra, the pocket dimension itself a parasitic entity. "There has to be a way," Kalia insisted, her eyes darting around the swirling cosmos, searching for a pattern. "Everything has a weakness, a source." She looked at the sovereign on its throne. It hadn't moved. It was a king, confident in its absolute power, letting its kingdom do the work. "It's the throne. It's the anchor for this dimension. If we can destroy it, we might be able to force it back into our world, where it isn't a god." It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. "I'll draw its attention," Kizaru said, a grim determination replacing his usual languor. He could not use his intangibility, but he could still fire his lasers. "Get the sage to the throne." He unleashed a torrent of light, the Yasukani no Magatama, not at the sovereign, but at the empty space around it, forcing the entity to manifest more tendrils to absorb the blasts, creating a momentary opening. "Kalia, with me," Naruto yelled. He grabbed her hand, his chakra flowing into her, shielding her. He used the brief window Kizaru had created, rocketing towards the throne like a golden comet. The sovereign finally reacted. It understood their plan. It waved a dismissive hand. Ants aspiring to fell a mountain. The space between Naruto and the throne stretched, warping into an impossible distance. He was running at full speed but getting no closer. Gravity twisted, pulling them sideways, threatening to fling them into the cosmic void. "It's not real," Kalia shouted, her eyes squeezed shut, her mind focused. "It's a psychic illusion. A mental block. Trust your senses, not your eyes. Naruto roared, shutting his own eyes and trusting solely in his sage mode. He could feel the throne, a cold, dead spot in the flow of nature. He ignored the dizzying visual distortion and pushed forward, his feet finding purchase on a reality only he could perceive. They broke through the illusion, appearing just before the throne. Naruto reared back his fist, a Rasengan the size of a boulder, infused with the raw energy of nature. It's LF, a sage art, massive Rasengan, roaring in his palm. The sovereign, for the first time, showed a flicker of surprise. It rose from the throne to meet the attack, its own hand coalescing with the power of a black hole. But the attack wasn't the plan. Naruto and Kaleya were the distraction. Now, Naruto bellowed. From across the void, Kizaru, who had been charging all his power into a single point, unleashed his ultimate attack. A beam of pure, condensed light, his Amaterasu, shot forward. But he wasn't aiming for the sovereign. He was aiming for Naruto. Naruto, trusting his ally completely, twisted in midair. One of his truth-seeking orbs flew to his back, molding itself into a perfect, concave mirror. Kizaru's beam of light hit the mirror, and was reflected at the speed of light, at point-blank range. Directly into the base of the empty throne. The throne, the anchor of the pocket dimension, made of solidified void, could absorb any energy. But it couldn't absorb energy that was moving faster than it could process. The sheer, concentrated velocity of the light-speed attack, focused on a single, conceptual point, was too much. The throne cracked. The pocket dimension shuddered, the stars flickering. The sovereign turned, a wave of pure psychic rage directed at Kizaru. But it was too late. The damage was done. The illusion was breaking. Naruto didn't waste the opportunity. He slammed his Rasengan not into the sovereign, but into the floor before it, shouting, "Sage art, Rasenrangan." The sphere exploded, not into a blast, but into a chaotic barrage of smaller, ricocheting Rasengans that shot around the destabilizing chamber, smashing into the walls and floor, accelerating the dimension's collapse. The void shattered like black glass. They were back in the ruined throne room of Mary Geoise, the gray, chaotic sky above them. The sovereign staggered, its perfect form flickering, its connection to its wellspring of power severed. It was vulnerable, but it was far from defeated. Insolent flickerings. It roared, its true voice a physical, destructive force that shook the red line to its foundations. It abandoned its humanoid form, its essence exploding outward into a monstrous, multi-limbed creature of pure, swirling darkness, a being of cosmic horror. This was the final battle. The true god against the sage and the light. Kizaru was a hornet of yellow light, peppering the creature with lasers, forcing it to focus its attention. Naruto was the hammer, engaging it head-on, his golden chakra cloak a stark contrast to its absolute darkness. He unleashed everything, tailed beast bombs, Rasenshurikens. The raw physical power of his sage mode. He was a one-man army, a myth made flesh. They fought it to a standstill, their battle tearing the peak of the red line asunder. But they both knew they couldn't win. They were bleeding energy, while the sovereign, even wounded, was still a being of immense, almost infinite power. They could hurt it, but they could not kill it. Naruto. Kaleya's voice cut through the roar of battle. She had found shelter behind a fallen pillar, an ancient, tattered scroll spread before her, one she had grabbed from the archive before their mad ascent. I was wrong. The seal wasn't meant to imprison it. It was meant to bind it. Her eyes were wide with a terrifying, brilliant realization. The text says, the vessel becomes the key. It doesn't need 20 kings. It needs a single, powerful psychic will to act as a new vessel, a new anchor. It can be sealed again. Naruto saw the truth in her words. And he saw the only possible answer. He dodged a sweeping tendril of darkness that unmade the rock behind him. He looked at Kizaru, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. He looked at Kaleya, her face, a mask of hope and dawning horror as she realized the price of her discovery. He had been summoned to this world to pay a debt. This was how he would pay it. He drove the sovereign back with a massive-tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken. Buying himself a few precious seconds. He flew to Kaleya's side. There's no other way, he said softly, his voice cutting through the chaos. No, she cried, tears streaming down her face. You can't. It will destroy you. It won't destroy me, he said, placing a hand on her cheek, his touch gentle. It will just change me. He gave her a sad, but genuine smile. You said it yourself. You wanted to build a better world. Every world needs a guardian. He didn't wait for her to argue. He kissed her, a brief, desperate, and final affirmation of the bond they had forged in the heart of the storm. Then he turned to face his destiny. He shot towards the raging vortex of darkness, not as an attacker, but as an offering. He dismissed his golden chakra cloak, dropping his defenses, opening his very soul. Hey, Kurama, he thought, a silent farewell to his oldest friend. Looks like we're getting a new roommate. Try not to bite. A deep, rumbling laughter echoed in his mind. It's been a hell of a ride, kid. He plunged into the heart of the Void Sovereign. For a moment, there was only an explosion of silent, golden light that consumed the darkness. The monstrous form of the Sovereign froze, convulsing. It tried to expel him, to unmake him, but Naruto's will, forged in a lifetime of struggle and strengthened by the bonds he had made, was an unbreakable anchor. He was not fighting it. He was merging with it, his life force, his very soul, becoming the framework for a new seal, a living prison. The black, chaotic energy began to recede, drawn into Naruto's body as if into a whirlpool. The monstrous form shrank, collapsing in on itself until it was just Naruto, floating in the center of the ruined throne room. He was different. His hair was still blonde, but it seemed to drink the light. His eyes, once a vibrant blue, were now the color of a twilight sky, deep violet with golden flecks, holding an ancient, cosmic stillness. The whisker marks on his cheeks were gone, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. He was still Naruto, but he was also something more. Something eternal. He landed softly on the ground. The sky above began to clear, the sickly purple vortex dissipating, revealing the normal, blue sky. The war was over. Kaleya and Kizaru rushed to his side. Naruto. Kaleya whispered, her hand hovering, afraid to touch him. He looked at her, and his new, ancient eyes softened with the old, familiar warmth. I'm still here, he said, his voice a quiet echo. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool to the touch. It's quiet now. I can feel it, but it's sleeping. I'm the cage. Kizaru, for the first time, looked truly weary. He took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. Well, he sighed, that was entirely too much excitement. The world is a mess. The government is gone, and our hero is a cosmic deity. What a hassle. The dawn of the new era was quiet. The world government, decapitated, crumbled into dust. In its place, a new council was formed, led by Kaleya, with Dragon of the Revolutionary Army and the rulers of kingdoms like Alabasta and Dressrosa at her side. It was the beginning of a long, difficult road to building the better world she had dreamed of. Naruto stood by her side, not as a husband or a king, but as a silent guardian. He rarely spoke, his presence a calm, steadying force. He was the protector, the balance. The man who had sacrificed his own simple peace for the chaotic, beautiful peace of a world that was not his own. His duty was eternal. One evening, years later, Kaleya stood on the balcony of their new home. Not a gilded cage, but an open-air pavilion on a peaceful, green island. She watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The world was still flawed, still struggling, but it was free. Naruto appeared beside her, his twilight eyes watching the same sunset. Their romance had never been one of passionate declarations, but of shared battles and a deep, unbreakable understanding. He had been summoned to be her groom, a political prisoner. He had become her partner, her sword, her shield, and now, her eternal guardian. She had, in turn, become his own. Sure to the humanity he had fought so hard to protect. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He did not feel warm like he used to, but he felt solid. He felt like home. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. He looked down at her. A faint, sad smile on his lips. I miss ramen, he admitted, his voice a soft whisper on the wind. But I wouldn't change a thing. Together, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, too lonely. Powerful souls who had found their purpose in the ashes of a fallen god, ready to face the endless dawn of the new world they had built. Chapter 10 End.